Spiderman! Whoa! Hey! Spiderman!
This is a remaster of an old critique with a new script, footage, voiceover and editing. The original is in the description below for posterity. 1, 2, 3. I love Spyro the Dragon. The colours, the sound design, the music, the traversal system. The simplicity Insomniac games brought to holding the square button for a satisfying cartoonish sprint that propels Spyro towards enemies made the game accessible, cathartic and crunchy, even all these years later in Toys for Bob's remake. Exactly 20 years after the little purple dragon toasted his first Nork, that accessibility, simplicity and catharsis is still on show in Insomniac's Spider-Man series. It's just now things are even prettier, even crunchier, have even more propulsion, and the main character gets his body broken. Marvel's Spider-Man doesn't just rest on the laurels of being the video game version of a recognizable icon, he feels, sounds, and swings like he always belonged to Insomniac. This was a team determined to put their own stamp on the webhead, and years removed from his first adventure with 2 other games bolted on, it's still a joy to jump back into, even when interviews, art books, and leaks have pulled back the mask to show what's underneath. But it wasn't always like that. This is Jay Ong, head of Marvel Games. In 2014, Activision lost the rights to making Spider-Man games and Jay was part of the team who had to find a new home for the wall crawler. He envisioned a world where a Spider-Man game could be held up along Rocksteady's ARKHAM series. Quote, "When the deal was done, Activision asked, 'So what are you going to do with this IP after you get it back?' I said, 'I'm gonna find a better home for it,' and Activision replied, 'Good luck finding your unicorn.' Well, it turns out that Spider-Man didn't need a unicorn. It just needed a development team to understand that the key to a great Spidey game is an awareness of his position in the zeitgeist without being a slave to it. From its first trailer, it was pitched as a vibrant separation from the messy, spotted history that had marked Spider-Man games in the past. A new start to bring in fans old and new. That history is part of the reason we love him as a character. After all, for every Spider-Man friend or foe, there's Spider-Man Web of Shadows. But Insomniac came to the party planning to deliver the definitive Spider-Man experience. We got a new suit, specific focus, and fresh interpretations of these characters, threading a world that feels grand, intimate, and inspired. If not, a little imperfect. But we'll get there. First, let's zoom in on the inspiration. The thing that makes Insomniac Spider-Man so warm to return to is that it's deeply aware of where its characters come from, what they mean, and their wide open potential. So, just like when I covered the ARKHAM series, I thought it would be fun to shed a little comics knowledge while we break down the game, because it's both faithful and twisty with its source material. Insomniac have cited a few inspirations for their version of Spider-Man's New York. The Dark Reign arc is here, a frankly weird addition because it's all about Scorpion becoming symbiote Spider-Man, but don't worry about that. So is Ultimate Spider-Man, but it's Brand New Day, Dan Slott's jumping on point that leaps off the list. Not just because of the parallels, but because of its purpose. It was pitched as a vibrant separation from the messy, spotted history that had marked Spider-Man comics in the past. A new start to bring in fans old and, well, you played the game and you get the idea. Much like its main character, Insomniac's Spider-Man has flaws, but also like its main character, there's a point where those flaws stop being what matters because its heart is so strong. In The Art of Spider-Man, comics writer, editor, and now Marvel Games creative director Bill Roseman said, "Spider-Man became my favorite hero, not because he was perfect, but because he wasn't. He was never the biggest or strongest competitor in the fight, but that didn't mean he never stopped trying. Just because he got knocked down multiple times, that didn't mean he didn't stop getting up." And it's with that in mind we're going to look at the good, the not so good, and the sticky with Insomniac's Spidey. Don't worry, webhead, you can take it. This is a commentary and critique of Spider-Man. What makes a good Spider-Man story? The web swinging,
the quips,
the villains, gotta be the villains. Oh, with great power comes great
Uncle
responsibility.
Ben, clones
make him
work
sad,
alone.
the
Keep
Daily
him in
Bugle,
poverty.
make him suffer. Yeah, alright, I get it, but some of the worst adaptations of the webhead have been laced with some flavour of these, to the point that they drowned in them. I'd say that a good Spider-Man story has 3 common stamps. If that sounds vague, it's because it is. We're not prescriptive on this channel. Number 1, clear duality between Peter Parker and Spider-Man. Number 2, by the end of the story, Peter needs to understand a new dimension mention to "with great power comes great responsibility." And number 3, an interesting villain which reflects this back. Not every Spidey story has these 3 things. In fact, one of my favourite arcs has Peter Parker barely in the tail, but I think it's a solid foundation to build from. Spider-Man's powers come at a self-inflicted price for Pete. He doesn't just take on his personal responsibility, he takes on everyone's, the eternal boulder he forever pushes uphill. For every success of Spider-Man, there's often a failure for Peter Parker, and vice versa. Sometimes it's easier to think of them as 2 separate characters, to the point where a few years ago, Pete literally had his wisecracking, crime-fighting self ripped out of him and given sentience. But when our game opens, Spider-Man is already encroaching on Peter's life, bringing a unique brand of chaos.
All units, level 4 mobilization. Location, Fisk Tower.
Fisk?
The first 10 minutes are visceral and exciting and immediately tell us everything we need to know about this version of our hero. The static of the scanner is the first sound we hear, highlighting the importance of Spider-Man's duties in Peter's life. Savings jars lie empty, a neglected plant shamefully ignored because we're too busy superheroing. We pan up, away from the world of Peter Parker and into the world of Spider-Man, with newspaper clippings that show us that this is a hero in his heyday. That contrast between Pete and the Spider is even in our hero shot, a grandiose suit reveal framed in a cluttered, stained apartment. Spider-Man's career is going pretty well, look at how badass his pose is, but he's bookended by the downhill spiral of Peter Parker's life. Pay his bills or save the day, Peter or the city. It's an easy choice, but before the credits roll, it'll get much harder. As the series goes on, an explosive villain showdown will become a bit of a staple for Insomniac's games, Rhino, Sandman, but today it's Wilson Fisk. Spider-Man has a bit of a pacing problem, but not with our opening. Lessons are learned and set up before the Kingpin is in cuffs. The state of the city and Spider-Man's history is stated like a headline. This is how you start a fucking superhero game. We catch Harry Osborn, Mary Jane Watson, Aunt May, Uncle Ben, and our Mayor Norman Osborn before we leave the apartment, established swiftly so we can get to the iconic Spider-Man stuff. Fighting goons in Times Square, swinging by a skyscraper, quipping and thwipping all over the place. Special care is given to simultaneously make us feel like a badass and characterize Spider-Man as quickly as possible. Stealth takedowns, big battles, and saving people as a priority. Insomniac understand that feeling like Spider-Man isn't just about the swinging or the kicking, it's about the rush of heroism that comes with it. The tone of the thing is as crucial as the mechanics or the set pieces. Stuff like Aunt May calling us about dinner during combat isn't just here for flavor, it's to ground the whole texture of this Spider-Man, and that emphasis on tone continues throughout, for better and for worse. The whole game goes to painstaking lengths to paint him as non-lethal, with quick wrist animations to save goons falling off rooftops, or brisk webbing animations to specifically show how he pulls his punches when fighting brainwashed civilians later. Though not sure throwing exploding motorbikes is the way to go, Spidey. The curated animations start here, grabbing a henchman by the scruff of the neck and swinging his legs out to shatter a window so the bad guy doesn't go splat.
You do know I can still see you, right?
8 years of this insolence.
Wilson Fisk, the Kingpin, has escaped our reach for 8 years, but today he's finally going down. Through an underwhelming boss fight. A villain that directly ties to whichever lesson Peter's gonna need to chew over is vital to the success of a substantial Spider-Man story. Kingpin might not be one of our 2 big bads. He might mechanically exist just to tutorialize regular brute enemies with his 2 whole attacks, but he's directly linked to Mr. Negative through the East Asian weapons and armor littering his complex. We're literally fighting through antiques and memorabilia that Martin Lee will later use as his iconography. "In 1 month you'll wish you had me back," he snarls as he's whisked off to the raft. Let's flash back 57 years to the Amazing Spider-Man number 50, the Kingpin's first comic book appearance. Peter Parker decides he's going to be Spider-Man no more. J. Jonah Jameson celebrates in the offices of the Daily Bugle. Wilson Fisk finally makes his move, stepping out of the shadows, smoke oozing from the maw on his big bald head as he sends his lieutenants out to confirm if it's true, if the wall crawler really is gone. He also has a walking stick that disintegrates people, but don't worry about that. Kingpin's terror comes from how he's just a man who can stand toe-to-toe with the Spideys of the world. He's the reason Peter returns to the suit, a man who somehow is able to unite the gangs of New York under one banner. His. "Crime's going to be run like a business," he says, and he means it. Insomniac's Fisk might not have the striking white suit. According to the art book, it was changed so he didn't share a colour palette with Mr. Negative, but the heart of his character is right here. He and Spider-Man have an ebb and flow, toing and froing for years. Spidey might not have wanted to admit it, but it's Kingpin's control of the underworld that stopped things tumbling into the scale of a city-wide disaster. His defeat is the first in a series of dominoes that will topple, leading to the Devil's Breath pandemic. He represents a major win for Spider-Man, which means we're just around the corner from a major beatdown for Peter. It's in his other job that eventually comes. Otto Octavius, just like Pete, is a guy constantly beaten down by the world around him. The Grant Committee, Osborn, his physical body. He's Peter's boss, yet Peter is his only friend, and he constantly reminds us of that. The lab is a collaborative junkyard. Pete doesn't work for Otto, he works with him. Seeds are sown early on to make us care about this relationship, care about Otto, and from this shot with the wires and tentacles framing him, a ticking timer of tension is set. His transformation into Dr. Octopus is inevitable, it's hardly a twist, but the game wants us to consider how we feel about that. When reviewers first harped on about how the game makes you feel like Spider-Man, sections like this were part of what they meant. We play as both Pete and Spidey throughout the game, and whilst Pete's sections are slowed right down, the world is so fully realised that they strengthen the tone rather than take away from it. To feel like Spider-Man is to feel all of the complications and difficulties which Pete faces in and out of the suit. And when we're out of the suit, Insomniac felt like they had to break up these story beats with gameplay, so the science puzzles were born.
Maybe you should take the rest of the day off, Peter. But we'll talk later.
The science puzzles do not strengthen the tone. I understand the idea. Pete's a genius, so we need to showcase that through gameplay, but to go from this to this is jarring and kinda misses the point. There are two types, three if you include the radio tower minigame, spectrographs, and circuits. Pete's a nerd who likes nerd things, so to make me feel like him, the gameplay loop of these minigames need to be more exciting. At the very least, a visual change that embraced the sparking of synapses that sums up who Peter Parker is would go a long way. The washed out colour palette makes these sections so visually unappealing that on my second playthrough I almost immediately selected the skip science puzzles option. If you have to put an option in your game to skip some of the gameplay, maybe that gameplay shouldn't be there in the first place. Soon Peter and Otto will have their balls kicked. They're working on a new prosthetic design that'll be more seamless, more affordable, and a notable competitor to the tech that Norman Osborn's Oscorp makes. And because they're a substantial threat to his fortune, Osborn will flex his muscles and pool their funding. For every Spidey win is a Peter loss, but we're not there yet. Things are looking up. Next stop, the Feast Center. In 2006, Spider-Man executive editor Tom Brevoort wrote the Spider-Man Manifesto, a list of rules and guidelines for Spidey writers to follow when creating their jumping-on-point brand new day. Plant the stake in the ground right away, he wrote. This is Peter Parker's comic book, not Spider-Man's. It's Peter's life, and his life and tribulations are the through line. Peter being Spider-Man is just one component of the overall whole. Feast, standing for Food, Emergency, Aid, Shelter and Training, is the bedrock of this Peter's civilian life. Something that Insomniac are masters of reinforcing is that Pete's a hero even without the mask, and it's important that we be reminded of that.
5 years ago, you walked in here and told me you were inspired by my mission to help others. Now it's you who inspires me.
This is a homeless shelter managed by Aunt May and owned by the mysterious Martin Lee. It gives May something to do and becomes a central location for a lot of our story, so we're encouraged to see why it's powerful, why it matters, and why it must be protected at all costs. May works there, Miles uses it to grieve, Martin Lee owns it, Peter ends up living there, it's where Miles gets his powers, and when everything goes to hell, it evolves into a pandemic center and the location of May's final lesson to Peter. Copying Feast's origins from the comics is a natural way to introduce Martin Lee to the story, warmly congratulating May on her long tenure and presenting himself as a role model that Peter looks up to. His proximity to Aunt May makes his eventual villain turn even more threatening than if he was just some guy looking to take down Norman Osborn, and portraying him as a good, charitable, decent man who truly believes in the good work the organization does, locked in an internal struggle between his true self and his alter ego, makes him a natural reflection to Peter. It's clear Pete spends a lot of time here. The residents wave hello, the building's blueprint is tattooed over his heart. Feast's mantra of, when you help someone, you help everyone, becomes the new dimension that Insomniac Spider-Man brings to with great power comes great responsibility. It makes their Spidey feel unique to them while taking Tom Brevoort's advice. This is a homeless shelter that plants that stake in the ground. Awkward science puzzles aside, this is Peter's story, not Spider-Man's, and we just need to look at the dialogue to see that in the detail.
Now that you quit smoking, what do you tell people when you come up here?
That I need a break from their crap.
There are two more friends to meet before our opening wraps up. The first is Yuriko Yuri Watanabe, NYPD cop and our gruff friend on the force. Being almost a decade into his career, Spider-Man's well established in New York, and that's not just because of the Daily Bugle. There's a reluctant partnership between Pete and the cops here, though that reluctance mainly comes from the NYPD, not Spidey. It's mechanically and narratively clumsy, something we'll get to when looking at the world as a whole, but despite the reluctance, Yuri is written with warmth. Spider-Man's never really had a Commissioner Gordon-esque character in his life, but she slips cozily into the role, demonstrated mainly from how she's one of the people the writing team have designated as a yes-ander. Yuri and Spider-Man are constantly bouncing off each other. Conversations rumble along with energy and banter, as if one of Spidey's powers is the ability to trick someone into quipping. In reality, this is one of his powers, his unique ability to naturally annoy his enemies so much that they're thrown off their game. But Yuri, at least for now, is not an enemy, so it's lovely to see her trip into what is effectively a bit with Spidey. Always steered by Spider-Man so it doesn't feel like he's being obnoxiously out-quipped by the world. Not every quip needs to be funny, it just needs to breezily move us forwards with levity, something some superhero movies forget. Thor: Love and Thunder. I understand that some people might find this style of writing annoying, but the reason it's become such a staple for stuff like the MCU is because when handled correctly, it can move exposition and establish characterization in a snappy and pacey way. For a game like this, that's really important because A, we are playing as Spider-Man, a power fantasy so thrilling that it frankly feels rude when the game stops us from doing it, and B, 80% of the game's story is delivered via phone call. That's not a criticism. The brilliance of Spider-Man is that it's able to establish tone so quickly in the moment. When things get serious, when the drama comes, when the emotion is necessitated, it's able to hook its player with turns that feel earned. If Spider-Man is a fountain of bad jokes, Peter Parker is a clogged faucet. He doesn't quip. He awkwardly babbles, something acutely reinforced when he apologizes to Otto by saying, "Sorry, I have a habit of making bad jokes in tense situations." When it comes to landing jokes, Spider-Man's success rate is at least 20%. Peter's is 1. And when he's alone with Mary Jane Watson, that number hits 0. Dear Stan and Steve, The Amazing Spider-Man #1 was quite good as first issues go, and in comparison to other first issues edited by you two, it was great. In the Spider-Man, you have a hero that really reaches out to the hearts of the readers. His financial state, his social life, and his acceptance as a superhero are all things that make this guy appealing. Yes, appealing. His appeal is gained more through pity than admiration of him. Thanks for your time and your fine publication. Tom Jones.
MJ? What are you doing here?
Same as you. Working. At least, I was.
MJ and Pete have broken up. Not because of some cosmic reason, not because of a devil's agreement with Mephisto, not because some dork is dating her instead, screw you Paul, but because sometimes relationships are hard. This version of MJ is embracing her inner Lois Lane, working for the Daily Bugle as an investigative reporter, an all too easy way to make her immediately relevant to Spider-Man's story. MJ becomes a source of information for our missions, and incorporating her into even side stuff keeps her relevant and gives her agency in the story. It comes into conflict with Peter, who naturally wants to protect her from the perils he faces every day. The duality of Pete and the Spider puts a block on their relationship because he feels an ever-mounting responsibility to keep MJ safe from harm, and she thinks she can handle it herself. She's all responsibility, no power. Tonight, she's gone undercover at an auction for Wilson Fisk's valuables, but it all goes to hell when a new gang, the Demons, storms the place. We're going to talk about the MJ and Miles missions later. I wasn't going to bother, but I'm a glutton for punishment, yet it's what's uncovered here that matters most. The masks the demons wear are unsettling. The energy that ripples from them is new, different. Spider-Man grows worried that a new big threat might be on the scene. But hold that thought, Pete, you stay here with MJ and Stan Lee. I want to talk about the suits. Spider-Man discourse is a cesspit at the best of times, but I remember the trenches that were the Raimi suit wars of 2018. Gross goblins sent bloody death threats over the initial absence of the Tobey Maguire suit, but a few years after release, nobody can call the game stingy with its unlockables. Insomniac followed old school Rocksteady's lead and released more movie suits for free post-launch. It took a while, but we got there eventually, and in the base game, most of these aren't purely cosmetic either. Most new suits have a power attached to it. For example, the Noir suit naturally gives you the ability to prevent enemies calling for backup, or the Iron Spider suit brings out 4 metallic arms that changes the animation style of attacks and doubles your strength. The Scarlet Spider suit generates holographic clones to distract goons in fights, a clone joke that I appreciate. While almost all of the suits look fantastic, seriously, some of the attention to detail here is awe-inspiring, they're not all created equal. The Fear itself suit looks weirdly bulbous and bloated. What is it about white suits in this game having the strange sheen to them that looks almost blinding? And the Secret War suit? Yeah, that's not Insomniac's fault, it just straight up sucks. It's difficult to separate great suit design from great art design. Do I adore the Ultimate Spider-Man design, or do I just adore the big eyes and Mark Bagley's spindly art style that's at odds with the Insomniac style? Do I really like the superior Spider-Man look, or do I just love the menacing tone of Ryan Stegman's panels? Well, you're in luck, because I'm going to piss everyone off by counting down the game's best 5 suits. Fight me in the comment. Number 5. The Iron Spider suit. Despite how silly the Iron Man-esque pulsars are in the hands, I love them from a visual standpoint. It's a great adaptation of Joe Quesada's design from the comics that pay homage to the Iron Man that would have designed it. Because we're moving into a 3D space rather than the 2D ink of the comics, Insomniac have had to add some more texture. If I'm nitpicking, they slightly overdo it with the lines, but I like how it feels like numerous parts that could detach at will. Number 4. Spider Armor Mark II. Marcos Martin's black and gold design is elevated by the sheer sheen of the armor plating. This is one of those few times where a smoother texture works better than the raised, rumbly look of metal. The only reason this suit isn't higher up is because it looks better suited to Miles Morales than Pete. Number 3. Emilio Laso's Velocity suit is a design specific to Insomniac's universe and part of the tie-in comic Spider-Man Velocity. I don't always love Spidey in a bulkier design, but I'm a sucker for when the spider legs go past the chest, and the shading of blue is just really pleasing to the eye with a backdrop of the dark, chromy red. Pete looks pissed in this suit. I love it. Number 2. The Antioch suit. It comes in the story during Pete's darkest hour, and while the ability that accompanies it, gadget refills, aren't particularly flashy, they're one of the more useful skills we can acquire. Basing the overall design off Octavius's tentacles gives it a crunchy feel, and the glowing yellow spider makes for a statement of a symbol for us to put on our chest. Number 1. The Advanced suit. Ultimately, the coolest costume in the game is the Insomniac suit itself. It's around about now that Otto Octavius designs it for us, claiming that he believes Peter is Spider-Man's tech guy.
Let me explain.
I only wish you told me sooner.
I wanted to, but I was afraid that if word got out, my family might be in danger.
Yes. I guess if you design his equipment, you're bound to be a target too.
Color contrast leads to slower visual processing time, he says. This suit is awesome, I say. The long legs are here. The white spider delivers an iconography that feels distinct to Insomniac. The webbed padding on the thighs is an easy way to get around the feeling that the bottom half are just trousers. The threading of white down to his heels make his footwear feel rigid rather than bare feet. It's strong, it's colourful. What matters here isn't that I have great taste, but that Insomniac looked past just visual appeal when designing their suits, thinking like Spider-Man. In a marketing promo, art director Jacinda Chu said, "In terms of modernising the suit, we thought about what a 20-something would be inspired by. We looked at athletic wear and compression wear. You'll see there's panelling all over the suit that mimics where you'd need support. The red is a reinforced and thicker material. The white spider is made out of a flexible carbon fibre material, so it's on his feet and gauntlets to give him extra protection. The technology and material of each suit was considered not just in the base game, but the DLC film suits as well. If you zoom in on the Sam Raimi design, you'll see the webbing is already slightly raised. Glance at the Scarlet Spider and you'll see the hoodie has a different material design to the suit itself. That is all frankly unnecessary detail, and it would hardly be a knock against the game if it wasn't there, but mechanically that detail is here as well. More techie suits, like the Hybrid or Iron Spider suit, require research points to create. What is a necessary detail that is unfortunately missing is accreditation. It's become a more and more obvious issue in superhero adaptations throughout the years. The original artists are being left behind despite films and games co-opting the designs that they create. Even in the remastered edition, Spider-Man's suits don't tell us where they originate from, what artists inspired the work. It's frankly unacceptable. It's something that the Guardians of the Galaxy game absolutely nailed, encouraging fans to go away and dip into the comic books that fed into each iconic look, but any hint or reference to John Romita Jr. or Eric Larson simply aren't here. It's real Norman Osborn behavior that sucks to see.
Speak of the devil.
Mr. Osborn.
Oh, please. How long have we known each other? It's Mr. Mayor.
It's Norman. Norman!
Norman, what do you think you're doing?
While Spidey's been trying to learn more about the demons, Otto had a radical breakthrough and the robotic prosthetic he and Pete have been working on is finally ready for their veteran patient. He is determined to make the world a better place. The arm is working, everything looks like it's going to be okay. And then Norman Osborn arrives with that beatdown I mentioned earlier. My comic sense is tingling. Technically, Norman Osborn first appeared in Amazing Spider-Man number 14. As the Green Goblin, he flew around on a broomstick, but it was sometime later that he took to the page formally without the Goblin mask. Because of stuff like the Raimi films, the zeitgeist has just accepted that Norman was always a father figure to Pete in the comics, and then tragically he was twisted into the Goblin. But in Stan Lee and Steve Ditko's origin, that wasn't the case. He was just Harry Osborn's mad dad who wanted to mess with Spider-Man. Flash to Insomniac's world and they've continued the trend. He whirls through this scene, smarmy, charming, reminding Peter of their old relationship, feigning that he's trying to help Otto, but ultimately abusing his powers as mayor to defund Octavius Industries. It's an effortless show of power. Insomniac's Norman doesn't need the Goblin to be a threat. All it took was a 2-minute scene for Osborn to crush Octavius. I know what'll make you feel better, Pete. Tokens! You like tokens? Spider-Man's got tokens falling out of its web shooters. The game's currency system is just one of the ways Insomniac ekes out the various suits. The other is level gating them, so there's a constant stream of rewards to keep you engaged in building out your Spider-Man. I love the currency system, and I'm gutted that it got streamlined after this game. Here, there are 6 types. Bases, crimes, challenges, landmarks, research, and backpacks give us a corresponding token. Combining them allows you to create suits, upgrade your gear, or even design new suit mods that help in combat. Some of these mods are extremely useful, like increasing a chance to shock an enemy if they get a hit in, or gadget attacks generating focus. They zoom in on what this Spider-Man is, a gadgeteer, branding him with a personality specific to this iteration while giving us choices to customize how our Spidey operates. Some of them aren't as useful, like the long-range scanner that's supposed to be used for stealth missions but you will never ever need. The token system specifically lets us customize the route to our Spider-Man. There's no garbage loot goot system here with senseless numbers and minor percentage increases. The upgrades are meaningful because they unlock stuff that's useful or unique. Because the suits bring a mechanical change with the abilities, and because the mods and gadget upgrades are on the whole legitimately helpful, it feels like Peter's heroism gives us intrinsic and extrinsic rewards. The feeling of saving the day makes us feel great on a macro scale, while the differentiation of specific tokens to specific activities makes us feel rewarded on a smaller one. If I see that I'm a couple of research tokens short of a new suit, I can hop by Otto's lab in my free time and skip through some spectrograph puzzles for XP and tokens. Did I say that part out loud? What these activities look like in practice vary, and while the game feel associated with the tokens ups player freedom and choice, the way we collect them sometimes feels like busy work. So, as the dust settles on Norman's seizure, let's head out into the world and tick off a checklist. Dear Stan and Steve, I'm an avid fan of the costume superheroes of all the companies, but Spider-Man is the best of all of them in my opinion. For one thing, he has no allies. The world hates him. His powers are unique, his costume is colourful, and his secret identity really is secret. His costume is excellent because I can appreciate the tough time he must have had drawing all the webs over him. The red and dark blue or black balance each other very well, and his bright white eyes set in black fall into the suit's composition perfectly. I want to start a Spider-Man fan club to promote him. I feel that he will become the most popular superhero in years. David Coleman. Ubisoft's shadow has loomed large and fallen long over the games industry, even now as it gasps and coughs, looking for someone to mercifully buy it out. Spider-Man is not immune to this.
As of today, Spider-Cop is officially retired.
Oh, thank God. I need a drink.
We'll all drink tonight, Yuri. Drink to the memory of Spider-Cop's tireless... Yuri? Hearing you there?
Oscorp radio towers have been erected across the city. Finding them and wangling through a little minigame exposes parts of the map which in turn reveal side content and collectibles. These crime towers deliver a quick minigame that shows off Pete's science skills and doesn't rip us out of the world, so it feels like it doesn't infringe on feeling like Spider-Man. A pulse shows that we have backpacks, landmarks, black cat stakeouts, random crimes, taskmaster challenges, research stations, side missions, secret landmarks, and a whole variety of bases for combat challenges. All of this side content is threaded together with silly narrative details that ultimately make them less boring than they could be. For example, as we unlock more and more of the towers across the map, we get snippets of dialogue between Yuri and Spider Cop. The radio towers are dated, yes, even back in 2018, and in a vacuum, they're tedious, but in the scope of the game's world building, they're tedious and dangerous. Despite what your favourite comic book YouTuber might say, the problem is not that Spider-Man helps cops. He might regularly be an outlaw and a vigilante, and he might often butt heads with New York's finest, but many of his stories have had a toe dipped in the NYPD. Just look at his friendship with Captain Stacy, a man who cherished Spidey's existence, no matter what the Andrew Garfield movie said. The problem is that there is a major over-reliance on the NYPD to structure the story and our missions. For sizable portions, it feels like we're at the beck and call of the police, and it isn't needed. Hell, when the Sinister Six eventually break out and destroy New York, we spend a cumulative hour helping police officers rather than New Yorkers. This is clumsy. What's misguided are the Oscorp radio towers themselves. An entire side mission is dedicated to Spider Cop helping a corporation set up a Big Brother system in New York. The NYPD's put surveillance out to the private sector, and Spider-Man seems to be its biggest advocate. Insomniac have the opportunity to do something really funny when Osborn turns into the Green Goblin, because those radio towers would be a big help for a supervillain. All that tower work means Yuri is feeling extra trusting today. There's a tip-off that the demons are going to seize a Fisk warehouse, and Officer Jefferson Davis is here with a warrant to make things less illegal.
You know we can't have vigilantes trespassing or doing illegal searches.
Yeah, I know.
Which is why I brought a warrant. So what do you say we do some perfectly legal searching?
It's smart for Insomniac to pit us alongside Jefferson for a battle against the demons. Ultimately, the reason why we're even here is because Insomniac wanted to endear us to Jefferson. He saves our life and even gives us a new gadget. What a legend. Battling the demons with Jeff brings a new dimension to combat. Having an NPC who can actually do damage against enemies is like a breath of fresh air. He can stun demons for us to finish off, and it makes us care about him a lot despite just being a character from one mission. It's a shame we don't get more beats like this, working with our various friends. A mission with Yuri later perhaps. This is a gap the DLC will later go on to plug with Silver Sable and Black Cat, but in the base game, Cat especially is dull.
I love making you chase me, Spider. Someday I might even let you catch me. Just not today.
The Black Cat stakeout missions are on the list of side activities that are not engaging, slowing us right down and taking us out of the Spidey fantasy to stare at the New York skyline. Spider-Man is a momentum hero, so standing on a rooftop, listening to Felicia flirt with us via voicemail for 10 seconds, and then looking through a camera is boring. Here is a big advertisement for the DLC. In direct contrast, the Taskmaster challenges are excellent. Tony Masters is in town working for a secret organization to test and recruit Spider-Man. There are 4 varieties: bombs, drones, combat, and stealth. Stealth is a huge weakness in this game, but the addition of hostages makes Taskmaster's inclusions feel fresh. The drone challenges in particular let me scratch that Spidey chase mission itch that's generally lacking from the main campaign. The only issue is that sometimes it's a bit vague on how you're allocated points. What does webbing mean in the bomb challenges? How do I improve my score? The sheer quantity of stuff to do in Marvel's New York looks overwhelming when it's on paper, but I think it's thematically prescient. Pete's a character who never has 5 minutes to himself, to the point it's psychologically conditioned him to feel anxious when he does find some peace and quiet. In Brand New Day, he tries to give up being Spider-Man and can't acclimate to civilian life. There are 19 optional bases for us to clear, major combat challenges split across the game's 4 factions: Fisk, demons, Prisoners, and Sable, all with twists that make them feel distinct. Fisks are always outdoors on construction sites, with thick metal pillars for us to swing around. The Raft Prisoners are always on rooftops with thin wonky walkways that are a major boon when making quick work of bad guys. The Demons are in warehouses, so the enclosed environment restricts some of our options. And the Sable camps are fenced units with high-powered artillery and watchtowers full of snipers. The beauty of these is that we can go back and replay them at any time to earn more base tokens, or if you just fancy challenging your combat skills. Remember this, we'll come back to it when we talk about Spider-Man 2.
Bad air hits children and the elderly first. This was a big one for my mom.
Harry Osborn is mysteriously absent, apparently backpacking in Europe, but both Pete and MJ comment that he hasn't been returning their calls. Strange. In his absence, he's asked Pete to check in on his passion project, research stations that have been monitoring a whole chunk of stuff like pollution, bird populations, etc. The actual challenges themselves are interesting because they require us to use our web swinging to solve each problem, but they join the rest of Spider-Man's side activities in how slowly they are introduced to us. In order to activate each one, we have to walk inside the research station, watch the same panning shot of some skyscrapers, and listen to what could ultimately be some copy-pasted dialogue from Harry about how his mum's dead, this research lab was as important to her as all the others, Oscorp's gonna shut it down, so we need a task to keep it open. What these are mostly are traversal challenges, and I am not exaggerating when I say this. A Spider-Man game can never have too many traversal challenges. Swinging through a data storm, swinging through invisibility shields to take down drones, swinging by and fixing up water pipes. If a research station's task has swinging in the sentence, they are typically brilliant. When variety is introduced, like the 2 Spider-Bot missions, they're so quick that they don't overstay their welcome, and you forgot these were even in the game, didn't you? And the final research lab mission is spectacular. Here, you have to swing a full loop of the city, connecting satellites while using your speed, mobility, and web swinging to dodge imminent strikes of lightning through a thunderstorm. There's a real challenge here. Often you have to change direction swiftly because the lightning strikes quickly. The mission ends with us reaching the very top of Oscorp Tower, trying to make the lightning strike the antenna. The research labs use side content to guide us to a location where we will eventually fight Doc Ock, making it a location we become familiar with and adding to the grandeur of the final confrontation. Side stuff is contributing to the feeling of the main campaign, and the research stations aren't alone in that.
The infamous dumpling recipe. Should have come with step 10, try not to burn everything in MJ's apartment.
I love the backpacks, little mementos strewn around New York that act as harbingers of this Spider-Man's history. I know I'd rather be finding these than generic Riddler trophies, but there's a sore lack of challenge with grabbing them. And that's okay, not every collectible needs distinct challenge. Sometimes it's nice just to find a cool thing in the world. They're simple, charming, and contribute to characterization and world building. For every backpack we find, we get a little story related to the Spider-Man comics and Peter's history. What's he been up to in the decade he's been in the suit? Well, he battled Kingpin on the night of his prom. He had a close call with Electro when he nearly got blinded. He had a close, tight relationship with Harry, and he learned that his parents were government agents before they died in a plane crash. It adds to the atmosphere of the game, and a lot of these inform much of our understanding of the dynamic between Peter and Mary Jane. We find the much-referenced dumpling recipe, which brings their past rushing forward to the present, strengthening our understanding of where the relationship was and where it is now. Meshing these side activities with the campaign would be a challenge. When Pete gets a call from Otto and says something like,
"Gotta love Doc's enthusiasm, but sometimes it gets him into trouble. Better get there before he hurts himself."
It's up to the player to juggle Peter's responsibilities with Spider-Man's. That sounds pretty important, Otto, but just let me web up these muggers or tick off this radio tower first. There's a catch-22 with an open-world Spider-Man game. By its very nature, there should be side missions and collectibles for us to web up as we battle through the main story. But what that means is there's a necessary evil that the pacing of the story will be impacted by that. All of these side activities are introduced as main missions in an attempt to integrate them into the main story. Yes, even the radio towers. So our opening act is a slow burn before the crescendo of the City Hall attack. That is about to change. Dear Stan and Steve, I think Peter Parker should have a girlfriend who sticks up for him when he's being bullied, and I don't mean some chick who's homely, wears specs and a sack dress with black and white saddle shoes, or is as science-minded as he is. I mean a doll with a good figure, get up and go, who digs jazz and rock and roll. You follow me? Sidney Wright. When Mr. Negative phased into comics with Brand New Day, he confused Pete with a homeless person. Peter arrived at the feast center missing his shoes, and Martin Lee immediately tried to take him under his wing. In the game, Peter is homeless.
I can't take this.
You can and you will.
I'll pay you back. Soon.
Just ask for help next time. You have to learn to swallow that Parker pride and accept that you're human, like the rest of us.
He will be for the rest of our time. No grant funding means no job. No job means no money. No money means no rent, so he was kicked out of his apartment and needs to hunker down at Feast. Despite a successful stakeout with Jefferson Davis as Spider-Man, Peter has now lost something yet again. He's living in Martin Lee's territory, and while Pete doesn't know Lee and Negative are the same person yet, we're right under the thumb of our villain. Norman Osborn is awarding Jefferson Davis a medal at City Hall. Jeff's nervous, but he's a reflection of Spidey's duty, so calls us up to tip us off that the demons are converging on a nearby Fisk construction site. Now with more puddle, let's talk combat. First things first, meet the triangle button, your new god. Worship it, praise it, it will dictate the flow and tide of each of Spider-Man's fights, so the two of you better get acquainted, and fast. As a hero, Spidey is both a crowd control combatant as well as a reactive fighter, meaning you need to be aware, particularly in this iteration, where enemies are and what they're doing at all times. Encounters throw waves of enemies at you to the point where later battles with the tougher Sable goons can start to feel overwhelming. In an interview with Codec Moments, creative director Brian Intihar said, "Next to traversal, combat was the most important part to nail in creating the game. We were laser focused on creating an experience that made Spider-Man feel like an acrobatic improviser. Spidey isn't deliberate, like say Batman is. There's organized chaos to how his fights operate. By my count, he's only been officially trained twice in the comics. Captain America whipped him into shape, and Shang-Chi developed the way of the spider with him after he lost his Spidey sense. But the webhead relies on instinct when in the throes of battle. An acrobatic improviser is the perfect pillar to rotate his combat around. We have standard melee attacks, web attacks, environmental attacks, and of course, the massive allotment of gadgets. You could prepare and still be an improviser after all. Just as we've discussed in this channel previously, not all options are created equal, and the key to good combat design, especially in a beat 'em up like this one, is how the player is forced into using these options. Despite having a variety of factions, the enemy types are all, at a core level, very similar. A brute who works for Kingpin isn't that mechanically different from a brute that works for the demons. All in all, the main campaign has 9 enemy types: standard grunts, gunmen, rocket launchers, shield enemies, stun baton enemies, brutes, jetpack enemies, whip enemies, and tombstones pals who can make themselves invulnerable. That might sound like a small number, and it is. Variety is the spice of life after all, but most enemies require a specific strategy to take down. For example, you can't just button mash a shield enemy or a stun baton enemy. Zipping over to a guy with a weapon means they'll automatically get a free hit, so you need to be prepared to follow up with a dodge, gadget, or leap away. Options present themselves with these guys, requiring you to use environmental objects, or pulling a weapon out of their grasp, or sliding underneath for an uppercut. At launch, it felt inevitable that comparisons would be made to Arkham's combat. In IGN's review, Jonathan Dornbush wrote, "Spider-Man's combat owes a lot to the aforementioned Arkham franchise, right down to the slow motion crunch when you take out the last baddie in a bunch. But that template is sped up dramatically in order to take advantage of Spidey's nimble nature. But years removed, all of that seems so silly now. Spider-Man and Arkham share very little in the way of combat feel. Bat's combat has a very particular rhythm to it. The sound design and animation embodies a rigidness and crunch, simultaneously combining a one-to-one brawler with crowd control. His rhythm is blues, but Spider-Man doesn't have that same rhythm, not even close. His rhythm is swing." Pun intended. With Spidey, we have to keep being aware of enemy positions, and using the triangle button, the webhead manually zips to whichever enemy the player is targeting. This won't happen without us thinking about it. There's an energetic sense of randomness and improvisation to Spidey's combat because of how each enemy requires a specific strategy to take down. At first, because once the player unlocks the ability to wrench weapons and shields away from a bad guy, a lot of our previous strategies vanish. Now instead, we just hold down the triangle button, rip a gun, shield, stun baton, or rocket launcher away from a bad guy, and basically demote this enemy from being a little tricky and different to just being a standard grunt. It's part of our initial decision making that we can either use our speed, agility, and gadgets against an enemy, or rip a weapon out of their grips and make them piecemeal for our spider strength.
Hey, Willie.
You.
Nice jumpsuit. Slimming.
Stay out of my business.
Spider-Man's spidey sense will reliably let us know if an attack is incoming, but he can't strictly counter. We later unlock the ability to take down standard grunts after a perfect dodge, but that's 2 inputs and requires that directional input again. Focus is generated in fights, acting as another decision to make. No matter how much we've generated from kicking ass, we can use it to heal ourselves. Alternatively, we can hoard it to unlock immediate finishers that are flashy and can wipe tougher goons off the board early. Mods can help fill us up automatically, diminishing some of the challenge at the expense of other equally as powerful mods. The game's upgrade system is consistently rewarding because it unlocks new abilities and tools. The aforementioned weapon steal mechanic is in there, so is pulling an enemy up to retain the flow of aerial combat. Thugs don't scale with your level, but either their health increases over the main campaign, or Spidey's damage input isn't as pumped up as we're led to believe. Spider-Man with his super strength should be able to take down a standard guy in 4 or 5 punches by the time you cap it at level 50, but whether you're at the start or swinging around in the endgame, Spidey never feels that much stronger, despite being told we've had plus 10 added to our strength. One of Insomniac's strengths when pitching a Spider-Man game was their history with gadgets. You just need to look at Ratchet & Clank to see that. So Insomniac has given us Gadget Spidey. With Peter Parker being the big old nerd that he is, of course gadgets could factor into his combat style. I've seen criticisms and callouts of the game's affinity for gadgets, and frankly, it sometimes feels like Spidey fans are afraid of letting him be smart. Some of my favourite beats in a Spider-Man story is when Pete has a gadget with him that shows his forward planning, just for the gadget to not be enough to take down the bad guy, so he has to improvise. Insomniac's Spider-Man gives us a hero just like that. Are you happy now they gutted this system for Spider-Man 2, you bastards? With a brawl, you have one very reliable takedown method, webbing enemies to surfaces. It's the reason why we had to battle some grunts alongside a large lorry in the opening 10 minutes. This is how Spidey beats the bad guys, and it's where your creativity appears. The end goal will often be the same, stick guy to wall, but the journey there will vary from player to player, pulling goons into the air, webbing them, and then throwing them to the ground, uppercutting a thug and sticking him to the pavement. Trip mines, impact webs, and web bombs are your 3 best friends, and if you need a breather, sure, the electro web is also pretty useful. But why the hell do I need the concussion blast or the suspension matrix? Best case scenario, I might just toss this down, throw some enemies into the air, and then web them up while they're suspended. But Insomniac, I can do that already without the suspension matrix, look. Problem solved. Why would I add an unnecessary step in my web takedown strategy? Spectacle's a good reason, but not necessarily a fulfilling one. The answer isn't to cut these Spider-Man 2, but to give us enemies that necessitate them. Spidey 1 has the whip enemies and armored sable guards that are initially immune to web impacts, but you're able to knock them into the air so easily with an uppercut that the suspension matrix still isn't necessary. Necessitating more inventiveness could go a long way here. Despite being a crowd control hero, Spider-Man has precisely 2 area of effect attacks separate from his gadgets. A ground slam that never feels as powerful as it should, and swinging an environmental object around to knock enemies down. As fun as it is to play around with different suit types, often you'll find yourself reverting back to the first suit power you get, the Web Blossom, which quickly eliminates almost all of the enemies in your close vicinity, but that is relegated to a special power-up, so not always readily available.
Hey, you got this, Dad. I mean, come on, you saved Spider-Man. I'm pretty sure that makes you an official superhero.
A superhero. Or maybe I'm just a guy who doesn't give up.
With the demons neutralized, Pete swings over to City Hall to see Jefferson Davis receive his award. Jeff steps up to the podium, nervous, and begins his speech. Boom. In his dying moments, Jefferson Davis tries to save lives. The demons appear, using their negative energy to plant suicide bombers around the rally. He's our first death in the game. Up until now, our story has been very PG, with webs and goons and quips, but no corpses. Act 1 ends with a mountain of death. A super-powered terrorist attack. Spider-Man is out of the fight, so we're placed in the shoes of Jeff's son, Miles Morales, numbly stumbling through the chaos in search of his father, the world literally crashing down on him. Depowering us and forcing us to play as Miles keeps the fear. There's no excitement here, no flips, no kicks, none of Spider-Man's jokes. Is perfectly framed to retain this deathly macabre tone. Norman Osborn's sickly smiling face glares from billboards and sides. His name everywhere we look to foreshadow that it's his experiments that were the source of this chaos. Martin Lee, Mr. Negative, formally makes his move, revealing himself to be the mastermind of the attack. Spider-Man's cockiness got the better of him. The demons are a real threat, and the fight isn't over. Making Miles a core part of this world, tying his story directly to Peter's, unites the present Spider-Man and the future Spider-Man as two men connected by tragedy. Miles is dominated by his grief, a boy very much unlike Peter in how he bears no responsibility for what happened to his family. Peter harbors guilt because he let the mugger who killed Uncle Ben get away. Miles harbors rage because his father's death was so senseless, with no connecting thread for him to cling to.
I'm sorry. I was just trying to help. I know.
Dear Stan and Steve, I enjoy Spider-Man very much. He is the best of your superheroes. However, I have a few suggestions that I think would improve him considerably. Number 1, lately you have been making him too powerful. Make him lose sometimes, and this goes for all your Marvel heroes, especially that arrogant Thor. Number 2, since you have made him popular with the public, things have been a little too rosy for my hero. His problems are what made him different. Number 3, keep his life as Peter Parker an important part of each book. James Shooter. Joseph Anderson once said that if gameplay is king, then story is queen, and if both of those are true, then atmosphere is a jack. The sound, the smell, the glow, the buzz, and few cities on Earth have the same buzz as New York. NYC is the archetypal city, and I think New Yorkers know that. There's an idea we have of it that Spider-Man replicates. If you close your eyes and think of New York, you're thinking of Spider-Man's Manhattan, and that's on purpose. This isn't just a sandbox with some skyscrapers for us to fight goons in. There are some great details which give the city a sense of depth and movement that we haven't seen in a Spider-Man game before. Completely innocent car accidents can be found while swinging about, with emergency workers taking insurance information and creating a perimeter. NPCs practice martial arts in the park or breakdance in Times Square. They give Spider-Man high fives, comment on a new suit as we swing around the streets, and considering the player isn't exactly going to spend hours jogging around the city, it certainly feels like Insomniac wants you to, right? One guy stopped me on the street ranting, "Hey, I don't believe that radio tower's busted, it's sending out mind control rays," and boom, suddenly a nearby tower is pinged on my map. Others tell us about weird looking backpacks or rumors of crimes that lessen the need to scan our way around. Undercover Fisk thugs will attack us by themselves if they spot us jogging around populated areas. There are daily bugles here, 53 of them available from news boxes, and we are never told about these. They're simply there if you want to find them. Each one comments on current events in the game, like the City Hall attack or the later Raft breakout, a gorgeous, optional detail. The city changes as the story goes on. It's always moving, always growing, refusing to grow static, just like the Manhattan of today. At nighttime, the assets are moved and changed. Cafes bring tables and chairs in from the cold when they're usually out to welcome people. When the game enters the final act, we trace an evolution. Feast turns into a pandemic center, shanty towns appear across parks and greenery. The sidewalks end up being littered with trash and bin bags. Where once we loved swinging through the golden lit city that never sleeps, it now becomes a dystopian nightmare with escaped convicts and militia sniping at us from rooftops. Here, in Act 2, we can already trace those changes. Norman Osborn has hired Silver Sable International, a private militia group, to clamp down on demon activity in the city. Checkpoints are set up, spotlights start to fill the skyline, traffic jams happen more often for God's sake, a specific attention to detail that is highly unnecessary, and I love the game for it. Mr. Negative's attack has degraded New York City. It started its devolution, an aesthetic shift that reinforces how monumental the end of Act 1 was. It's like Peter says, this wouldn't have happened under Fisk.
Can you at least tell me where the truck is?
Let me check. Alright, looks like it should be at the municipal garage at Bowery and Grand.
Got it. Thanks, Eddie.
To rewind our story back an hour, let's look at, in my opinion, one of the most underrated missions in the game, Home Sweet Home. One of the best things about the Sam Raimi Spider-Man movies is how involved in the city Peter was. The New Yorker montages were one of the best parts of that trilogy. From grabbing a drink at a bar or, yes, delivering pizzas, it felt like he had a finger on the pulse of Manhattan. In Home Sweet Home, the game puts this front and center. Pete gets evicted from his apartment and has to go on a journey across the city to find his stuff. He has to work directly with Eddie in sanitation and keeps calling him up to pester him while he basically roots through New York's garbage. The two of them use reference points like pizza joints that have been replaced by different pizza joints with the same name, using New York landmarks to guide Spidey through the city. A New Yorker helps Spider-Man out, rather than the other way around. All of this is in focus when Silver Sable appears and locks horns with us.
Oh, the mayor has a pet army now?
Next time you get in my way, I will not be so gentle.
Go. We'll talk later.
Her checkpoints are a damn eyesore, her men are rude and demeaning. We want nothing more than to tear them down and rid New York of Sable International. But in keeping with the presentation of the world, it's really fun how we can learn about Sable's arrival if you listen to J. Jonah Jameson's radio show before she even shows up. Triple J's show is half of the reason I enjoyed swinging about so much. Including the DLC, there is an hour and a half's worth of just the facts with J. Jonah Jameson. New Yorkers call in to agree with him or tell him he's a jackass. The year, yes, Jonah's getting his own comics history lesson too. The year is 1963. Amazing Spider-Man, number 1. J. Jonah Jameson has been around since the wall crawler's inception, ranting about how he's no hero, not like his son, the test pilot. Jonah's part of the wallpaper by this point. The idea of a Spidey iteration without him feels hollow, not least because he's often been a central plot point in Spider-Man's canon. Just 10 issues into The Amazing Spider-Man, we catch Jonah alone at the office, and he reflects on why he hates him. "All my life I've been interested in only one thing, making money," he says. "And yet Spider-Man risks his life day after day with no thought of a reward. If a man like him is good, is a hero, what am I?" Spider-Man's existence is existential for Jameson. In the current run, he and Spidey have become reluctant friends. Jonah even knows his secret identity. Christ, they were technically stepbrothers. There's a tie that binds Pete and Jonah outside of the mask, despite Pete's dislike of him, and I'm sad to see there's not an explicit relationship here because the focus is on Pete's science career rather than his life at the Daily Bugle.
Of course, we do have things now we didn't have then. Maniacs who shoot electricity out of their eyes. Walking piles of sand? Nazis made of bees?
Insomniac City gives us a Jonah who's evolved into an Alex Jones-esque conspiracy podcaster that feels like a natural next step for the character, though comparing Jonah to Alex Jones is doing the guy a disservice. At least Triple J has some good qualities. There's a lovely beat in the third act when he unironically states to New Yorkers that they need to stick together, look out for each other, with zero punchline during the Devil's Breath pandemic. Jonah doesn't just comment on main story events, but side quest stuff too. After a research station makes us plug holes in some water towers, he rambles about how Spider-Man's poisoning the water supply. I appreciate that Insomniac gives you the option of unsubscribing from him, but who would? The pizzazz and character of Jonah's talk show is translated into those various side missions that crop up. It's not just side activities that fill our time, there's full little side quests with narrative through lines, and the quest givers have character and personality. I'm immediately reminded of being assisted by a dorky bird watcher who spotted some hooligans up to no good in Central Park, or Missing Persons, where we work with a college kid to track down his friends after Mr. Negative attacks them, or my personal favourite, Howard's Pigeons, where we help an old friend of Feast track down his squawking girls because they've escaped their coop and gotten lost. There's warmth here, there's sincerity, there's earnestness, and most importantly of all, the pigeons let me do my much desired Spider-Man chases. It lets us see New York in a different light. Missing Persons forces Spidey to use his knowledge of the city to track some people down. Hell, in one mission we even get to fight alongside Spider-Man! Get him, Spidey! It's in these side missions that the friendly neighborhood part of our friendly neighborhood Spider-Man appears. A chunk of them are given to the cops, but we are still working with New Yorkers, not just punching someone or collecting something. Spider-Man PI makes us work with a lady who's worried her husband is wrapped up in something bad, and the wealth of writing that accompanies each mission makes it feel like Spider-Man and New York have a partnership outside of his working with the cops. I'm not going to say these side missions are perfect, the tasks themselves can be a little dry and lack the contextual variety that the later games will improve, but they're all in service to a living, breathing New York, and there's one set of side quests that deserve a special mention.
The angry drug lord drank alone. There's a poem in there somewhere.
You know better than me.
Poor Tombstone. Lonnie Lincoln's comic book origins are as underrated as his existence in Spider-Man's Rogues Gallery. Appearing first in 1988's Web of Spider-Man, he was created purely because writer Jerry Conway wanted to do a story featuring Hammerhead, but wasn't allowed to. Writing in back issue, he said, "My general motivation was the need to work with the characters who weren't central to the Amazing Spider-Man title, since that was the main book. I had a desire to bring back the ruthless gangster Hammerhead. It just came to me as a character type. One thing led to another, and as his backstory expanded, readers responded well to it. But years since, I think Tombstone has proven himself more terrifying and more ruthless than Hammerhead ever was, with filed, pointed teeth and impenetrable skin. Tonight, he's working for Mr. Negative, building him armored vehicles to help with his attack on New York. Mary Jane Watson's done the investigating. It's time for Spider-Man to do the web work. What sets Tombstone's side missions apart is A, we get a new enemy type because his goons were able to take temporary doses of the chemical that makes him indestructible, B, fully voiced, well-shot cutscenes, and C, a legitimate boss fight in its own arena. Tombstone is a huge, imposing, indestructible shape of a man at the start of his tale, hyping us up for a monstrous encounter. Ultimately, Spider-Man finds a way to cure Lonnie of his condition, weakening him as a gang leader and wiping him off the board as a threat. It's a small beat in the grand scheme of things, but this is a Spider-Man that believes his villains can always get better, and even though he beats the crap out of Tombstone, the side quest ends with the door open for a brighter future. But what does Martin Lee think about all this? Tombstone's been an ally in his gang war, but Mr. Negative doesn't seem to be too shaken up over it. His plan is so direct, focused, and simple that losing someone like Tombstone barely loosens the screws. It's in Feast that we learn more. For reasons currently unknown, Lee is obsessed with Norman Osborn. Just before the City Hall attack, he called the mayor not to warn him, but to prove a point. Norman did what Norman does. He slinked away without telling anyone else they were in danger. Lee is after something called Devil's Breath, and if he gets his hand on it, it could ruin Osborn. Mysterious.
What matters is you are both safe.
Amen.
But the bombers are still out there. Who knows what they've planned next?
I don't think you or May have anything to worry about. As long as you stay away from places you're not supposed to be.
Martin Lee has no interest in harming Aunt May, some juicy dichotomy to bounce off of Spider-Man. He has two sides to him, just like Peter does, and he's wrapped up in an internal struggle, just like Peter is. He doesn't suffer fools gladly, but he spent his whole life trying to balance the yin and yang of his self. Martin Lee, Mr. Positive, the philanthropist that runs New York's biggest homeless shelter, and Mr. Negative, the gang leader and terrorist. So, back into the city we go. The demons are tearing up the concrete, Sable are useless despite their stamp on the city, and we've got some crimes to stop. You are Spider-Man, swinging about the city. I know, feels good, right? The police radio in that there's a disturbance happening in Hell's Kitchen. You web over, find some bad guys, and beat them up. Is this crime A, a mugging, B, a drug deal, C, assault, or D, police under fire? If you guessed any of those answers, then you're wrong. It's actually armed robbery, stupid. And yes, I used this gag already in my Arkham critique. Shut up. When you rip away the differently skinned enemies, or the different UI labeling, there are actually only a handful of different types of crimes in the game. Fighting a group of bad guys, stopping a speeding car, or bomb disposal. Where are the burning buildings? Where are the Z-list villains to chase down? No, Screwball, you stay there. Sometimes what the game tells you is an active crime doesn't really seem to be an active crime. Some burly men chilling on a rooftop, apparently that's a crime. Often you can just sit and watch the crimes and nothing will happen without your intervention. The NYPD are frankly useless. They can't even thin the numbers of criminals without Spider-Man's direct help. Even in the DLC, the game tries to keep up this facade that it contains numerous different types of crimes by segmenting them in your menu as demon crimes or sable crimes. But aside from the types of enemies you fight, they often just boil down to land in the street, fight a wave of bad guys, and swing away while a tiny bit of XP pops into your bar. Now there are exceptions here. For example, car accidents rumble up occasionally where Spidey needs to leap down and move some rubble out of the way, and I like these purely because they don't involve hitting someone and let us think about saving people in a different way. Sometimes, very rarely, we even get a bit of emergent play. Escaped convicts lead to Sable agents showing up. I even had a crime where I helped a guy who was in a hit and run that then turned into a shop heist, that then turned into a car chase, that then turned into a Fisk henchman trying to assassinate me. It just needs more variables and scenarios for the algorithm to mix up and stay fresh. When you're not swooping down on unsuspecting muggers, Spider-Man is taking to the air and drinking in the vibe of New York. This isn't just Liberty City with buildings to swing from. Everything is curated through the lens of Marvel. So, what does Spider-Man's New York look like? In 2010, the New York Center for Independent Publishing ran a panel called New York, the Super City. On it, Peter Gutierrez said, "In the Marvel comics of the 60s, the city and its environs became a kind of non-stop action fest, with the Fantastic Four headquartered in Midtown, Spider-Man hailing from Queens, and Tony Stark of Iron Man fame launching missiles from Long Island. Really though, it's those downtown canyons and dizzying heights that are inseparable from the concept of a superhero. In fact, one might claim that the superhero has altered the relationship to urban space itself, at least among comic book fans. After all, don't skyscrapers now reside differently in our imaginations thanks to all of those awe-inspiring human figures that swing and leap from them without fear? Avengers Tower, Alias Investigations, the Sanctum Sanctorum, Wakandan and Simkarian Embassies, Josie's Bar, the bar with no name, the list goes on and on and on. The world of Spider-Man isn't just slapped on top of New York, it hums along in tandem with Insomniac City. We can visit and interact with Uncle Ben's grave, graffiti of Jonah or Rhino burst off of walls, something the Miles Morales sequel will crank up to 11. Midtown feels like a different district to the financial sector, while bursting with personality that feels like that magical idea of New York. New Yorkers will gossip and talk about their city, giving it personality through incidental dialogue. A fictional Twitter is created to track what individuals think about the wall crawler's antics as the story progresses. This especially is a key way to connect Spider-Man to New York's population without dragging it out. If you want to touch the pulse of the city, you can at a moment's notice just by touching the menu. You can't go anywhere without being reminded that New York matters. New York is worth protecting, and Spider-Man wouldn't be Spider-Man without New York. Even the fast travel loading screens add dimension, with people sleeping on Spidey's shoulder in the subway, and that has been cut from the remastered edition in the name of shorter loading times. Next Gen is here, baby, and it makes me want to gouge out my eyes. Just because Pete doesn't work at the Daily Bugle doesn't mean he's lost his love for photography, and it's through this token gathering that we're encouraged to go out and breathe in the morning glow of New York. We're not just snapping pictures of Oscorp Tower, but legitimate New York staples that have been faithfully recreated. Hey look, it's the Flatiron Building. Hope the boys aren't home. Times Square, Battery Park. Insomniac's world designers understood that to make the best Spider-Man game yet was to make the best New York yet, with detail and scale that breaks past the web-swinging or the skyscrapers. Seeing Fogwell's gym made me gasp with delight. Seeing the Radio City Music Hall made me whoop and holler.
So, hope you don't mind me asking, but it seems you and Norman have a bit of a history.
We were lab partners in college. Became friends.
Spider-Man's facing a major crisis with Sable's arrival and the City Hall attack, so that means Peter is due some good luck. Otto's pulled some strings and managed to secure a bit more funding. That means Pete's got a job again. Hooray! Otto has a neurological disorder. His body's slowly breaking down over time, and Insomniac have pulled from comics' best rendition of Dr. Octopus for their inspiration here. In 2013, Dan Slott diagnosed Octavius with a terminal illness, leading to his most nefarious crime yet. Yes, even more nefarious than marrying Aunt May. He swapped bodies with Peter Parker, meaning Pete died cold and alone in the body of Dr. Octopus, while Ock himself leaped into a fantastic run of comics as the superior Spider-Man. Pete's work with Otto, the player's work with Otto, means we are participating in the creation of Dr. Octopus. And it all links back to Norman Osborn. Otto and Osborn actually formed Oscorp together. They were called the O's, meaning Oscorp is actually O's Corp. I will not be calling it O's Corp, sorry Otto. Having Norman Osborn be the catalyst for the twisted descent of Mr. Negative and Doc Ock makes the game feel like a whole package by the time the credits roll. They're not two stories bolted together, they're two men that wear masks.
Damn it! This is all your fault, Norman, you son of a...
The only difference is Otto doesn't know he's wearing one yet. Dear Stan and Steve, I immensely enjoy your magazines, however I was quite disappointed with your revelation as to why J. Jonah Jameson hates Spider-Man. How can Triple J, who has provided work for hundreds or thousands and news for millions, be said to be immoral? Why is a man that has amassed a fortune solely through providing the news faster, cheaper, more concisely and more accurately than any other source accepted a standard of morality that holds his production, his virtue, to be evil? Money is not a tool of the looters or the moochers, it is a tool of the producers. John Bailey. It's date night with MJ, and by date night I mean two exes scrambling to start fresh while Pete burns dinner. Mary Jane musters her courage and suggests a team-up, a partnership, but it's all interrupted by a residential break-in. Saved by the sirens.
Sorry to cook and run.
Did you just leave your clothes on the kitchen floor?
This scene was in fact rewritten late into development. Originally, Insomniac had it that MJ would turn away from her laptop and Pete would be gone, Batman style, off into the night to save the day without so much as a goodbye. But in the end, they thought it was too cold. Nothing like a little bit of awkwardness to bring warmth to a relationship. Charles Standish is being attacked in his apartment. The demons are wanting financial records of Oscorp scientists who worked on Devil's Breath. They're starting with Dr. Isaac Delaney, but shh, we gotta be quiet. The demons are holding Standish hostage. Stealth mechanics engage. Spider-Man has a stealth problem. The Itsy Bitsy spider has more options and gizmos than a lot of his contemporaries, so a slick, definitive stealth system that lets him operate from the shadows should be a no-brainer. But it feels limited here. Using vantage points, we can web enemies up to perches quietly, or swing down to take out an enemy with a swift kick to the head before darting back up to the ceiling. There's freedom there because Spidey isn't limited by what surface he can retreat to: walls, ceilings, rafters. The impact web sends goons flying to stick to walls, cars, boxes, you name it if you can aim it right, and of course, there's the tripwire webs. By far the most entertaining gadget in Spidey's arsenal and your best friend during stealth sections like this. You can attach them to objects so they lie in wait as a trap, or you can stick them to enemies so they get slammed into their pals. With these gadgets and these gadgets alone, a stealth sequence can turn into something more suited to the Benny Hill theme, in keeping with Spidey's quippy, light-hearted nature. And that is it. 4 options. Enemies all have alert systems above their heads to tell you if it's safe or not to go in for a takedown, meaning stealth is effectively always on easy mode. Oh, can't get that guy, the UI tells me it's not safe. This guy's fair game though, really glad I didn't need to think about that. There's no risk-reward system here, it's following button prompts. The AI of enemies might as well be called the lizard because it's basically in the gutter. You can shoot webs at barrels or boxes to call over foes, but they never wander far enough for it to matter. And if they do come across one of their colleagues webbed up, they'll shout something like, "The spiders here," but that's it. Their behaviors won't change, they won't start looking for you or specifically aiming at vantage points you're likely to be hanging out in. No special enemy types prove to be a threat during stealth, like bad guys armed with night vision goggles. Out in the open, during Taskmaster's stealth challenges, snipers sit on rooftops with laser sights. This is beautiful and adds something new to be alert to, but I wish that wasn't the ceiling for stealth-focused enemies. During base missions, you can wipe out the entirety of the first wave in stealth without a single goon even smelling you, but as soon as the second wave starts, every enemy in the tri-state area knows exactly where you are at all times. It's impossible to lose enemies once they've locked onto you, meaning there isn't much in the way of strategy, of maneuvering around these foes. But honestly, the main issue here is with the level design.
MJ, I'm at the first location on your list, and guess what I found?
Demons?
Give the lady a prize.
Let's take the base missions for example. All of them are in big open spaces, warehouses, construction sites, and so on. One room with a few ledges and a couple of staircases. You can stand in one corner of the room and immediately see everything that's going on. There's no complexity here. Despite the fact Spider-Man can crawl through vents, we never use this to get the drop on enemies organically during gameplay, only during scripted moments in the main campaign. In case you're wondering, when credits roll, the vent takedown tally is at 2. Makes you feel sorry for the person who had to animate it. The design of these spaces need more complex machinations. Security cameras, tripwires for us to watch out for, little extra rooms for us to play around in, rather than just one large entrance hall to tackle bad guys. Environmental takedowns exist here, cranes to pull on or bookshelves to topple, but they're so noisy and you can't booby-trap them if you do go for that option. It'll simply alert too many thugs and then wham, combat's begun. That's what happens with Charles Standish. Once we clear out the penthouse, the game invades itself by bringing in a horde of goons to fight. Spider-Man's combat is great fun, but it is frustrating to see that it doesn't have faith in stealth to carry a full sequence.
His name, Dr. Morgan Michaels.
No!
Our second stop in our scientist hunt is the University Costume Party, a big fat excuse to build a set piece surrounded by Easter eggs, but a superhero game without costumes ain't a superhero game worth playing. 3 professors are dressed up as 3 of our old enemies, Mysterio, Lizard, and Vulture. Oh, and hey look, it's beloved supervillain El Muerto, hope he gets a movie soon. Professor Isaac Delaney tells Mr. Negative what he needs, the location of the bioweapon Devil's Breath. Lee uses his abilities to force Delaney to shoot himself. If the terrorist attack at the end of Act 1 hadn't set Negative up enough as a distinct threat, witnessing this grotesque way that he murders someone certainly solidifies it. This is tense. Anyway, I wonder what Mary Jane's up to right now. If Peter's stealth is a letdown, MJ and Miles are at the bottom of a well. She is off to a nearby Sable camp to interrogate Charles Standish. After Spidey saved him from the demons, Sable moved in and kidnapped, rescued him. We play as Mary Jane Watson 5 times in the game, and for the majority of that time, all MJ can do is creep around, push over boxes, and occasionally throw lures to move enemies out of the way. There are no options here, no freedom or creativity in the stealth mechanics. Even the objective markers are only a few feet ahead of us, funneling you in case you somehow get lost in this corridor. Despite the fact we get a stun gun for MJ later, this inclusion happens far too late in the game for it to be taken seriously as an option. It's not just that when we play as MJ or Miles we feel disempowered, it's also because the transition is so jarring because these sections are some of Spidey's most on-rail moments. Spider-Man's stealth might be dull, but at least there's freedom in the movement and we hardly ever need to engage with it. We go from swinging about, choosing from a plethora of gadgets and choices, to pushing up on the analog stick and occasionally chucking a lure about. It's boring, it's dull, and frankly, I think a lot of players would have swallowed this version of MJ a lot easier if we didn't have to experience these dull mechanics so often. Insomniac's Mary Jane Watson is a completely unique creation for the game that carries the spirit of comic book MJ. In the words of Bill Roseman, our Mary Jane has clear purpose and her agency is pivotal to Peter's evolving sense of self. You have to learn to trust people, and that's something Pete is going through with his relationship to MJ. In many modern stories, Mary Jane has displayed her spirit, intelligence, and tenacity, which we're expressing through her passion to be a crusading Daily Bugle reporter. MJ doesn't need a mask to be aspirational, something Marvel's recently forgotten by making her the hero jackpot. She grounds Peter, keeps his Parker pride in check, and is a counterweight to his Parker luck. She doesn't need Peter or Spider-Man, which is honestly the thing that makes her most attractive and most compelling as a character wrapped up in a world of superheroes. She has her shit together. She pays her rent on time. She is able to take risks in her career. She embodies the life Peter could have if he stopped being a superhero. The early Amazing Spider-Man run introduced her as this by using Aunt May to tease her first appearance over and over and over again until that famous panel bounced off every nerd's glasses. Face it, Tiger, you just hit the jackpot. While Pete was severely struggling with Spider duties and Parker responsibilities, MJ came into his world and recontextualized all of it. I think her history has been rewritten to criticize her for lacking agency, but the beautiful thing about comic book MJ is she always had agency. She knew Pete was Spider-Man before they dated, and still chose to get involved. This is a life she chooses. Every single time. Every single time. Paul. Insomniac built a mountain that was honestly going to be difficult to climb from the offset because when our story opens, Peter and MJ have broken up, so there is constant friction here. I like MJ here. She brings the grounding, she brings the balance, and she brings the aspiration for Pete. But nobody wants to be nagged while playing as Spider-Man.
I thought we broke up so you could focus on your career.
We broke up because you wouldn't stop treating me like a baby. Don't do this, MJ. Don't do that, MJ. Oh, that's too dangerous, MJ. I may not have super spider powers, but I'm not made out of glass.
And sure, it's not about what a player wants, it's about what's needed for this story, and the story of MJ and Pete is handled delicately and realistically. I have had some of these conversations, minus the superpowers. The issue is with the gameplay that's meant to prop up this narrative. It's frankly hard to empathize with MJ when she's talking about how she wants to be included in taking down the bad guys more, because we experience how useless she would be in these situations firsthand. And Miles Morales doesn't fare much better.
You're Spider-Man. You're the amazing Spider-Man. You're the spectacular Spider-Man.
And a few other choice adjectives Jameson uses. Look, that was really brave. But next time, leave the fighting to the pros, okay?
Okay, but what if there aren't any around?
On his first day at Feast, Pete finds Miles getting mugged and swoops down to save him. Up until now, the game's characterized Miles as an adorable fanboy, but also someone searching for a purpose. He wants to find a way to honor his father's memory. He wants to channel his frustrations into being a guy who doesn't give up. Even though Miles doesn't know who's under the mask, Pete inadvertently starts his spider training here, showing him one of the most important tactics he'll later use as Spider-Man. If the other guy's bigger, you gotta be quicker. Shame then that mechanically, Miles' missions are almost as much of a slog as MJ's. We will play as Miles 3 times before credits. Missions curated to showcase his smarts and ability to think outside the box, a skill set that connects him to Peter. He's not strong enough to lift rubble off of his mother, so he uses leverage. He can't throw a punch, so he hacks screens and equipment to sneak by Sable guards. These stealth sections carry the same pitfalls as MJ's, but they are less of a problem because A, there's not as many of them, and B, 2 out of the 3 are sincere emotional beats that showcase what it would be like being a non-powered person in a super-powered world. The attack on City Hall, Rhino's rampage at the dockyard. Let's jump on to Grand Central Station for an example of how Insomniac do these missions well, because this is one of my favourite moments in the game, full stop. Martin Lee has the Devil's Breath. He's threatening to release it. MJ arrives at Grand Central Terminal because it's a heavily populated area, so likely going to be his target. Through her eyes, we get to see a few of the things Oscorp are designing. Tech of the future, invisibility, medical drones, etc., teasing at equipment that a certain goblin might find useful in the future. The demons attack Grand Central Station and take onlookers hostage, including MJ. Through her eyes, we get to see Spider-Man from a civilian perspective. Spidey wants to get MJ out of there, but the dangers come to her, and the two will need to act like partners to make it out alive. A new mechanic is introduced, a mechanic that ought to have been the focus rather than tossing lures around. MJ highlights goons away from the hostages that Spider-Man can stealthily take down. It feels fresh. It feels like we're simultaneously controlling both heroes. If Mary Jane Watson's missions had more moments like this to reinforce their fledgling partnership, then the dollar stuff previously would have worked, because it would serve as a contrast. With the bomb defused, we swing into the underground and chase Mr. Negative onto a nearby subway train. Even after everything Lee has done, Spider-Man is still determined to help him. There's no animosity here. Pete still sees the good. "Let me help you, Martin," he shouts. Despite embracing the color and spectacle that comes with being Spider-Man, Insomniac's Peter almost always uses familiar human names for his foes. Shocker isn't Shocker, he's Herman. Ock isn't Ock, he's Otto. Negative isn't Negative, he's Martin. Act 2 closes with one of its best missions, but one of its most mechanically underwhelming moments, only saved by the fact we get a real boss fight with Martin Lee later on. Visually, battling Negative in a train carriage looks fantastic. The camera closes in, making this battle feel more claustrophobic than any of the others so far. Spider-Man is trapped in a metal can with a very dangerous villain. But gameplay-wise, all we're doing is watching Lee telegraph two attack types.
What is there to figure out?
The day is saved. Mr. Negative is shipped off to the raft, and Peter Parker falls out with MJ.
Oh, you think?
Every success for Spider-Man carries well, you get the idea. As we look ahead to Act 3, both worlds are about to crash into each other, and things will never be the same again.
Great.
Dear Marvel, I'm just genuinely curious as to why the Peter Parker of Earth 616 can't just develop. Why shouldn't he be allowed to be married? Have a kid. Bruce Wayne has tons of kids if you count all the Robins. Clark Kent has John Kent and Lois Lane. I know Peter being married and having a kid shakes up the status quo, but that does not have to be a bad thing. It doesn't feel like Peter is developing in any way. I know sales are still good, but maybe sales would be even better if Spidey fans got what they've been mailing you that they wanted for years. Sincerely, a Spidey fan.
It's time to show the world what we've done.
Otto, the neural web isn't isolating your motor neurons. It could be affecting other parts of your brain, your inhibitions, your mood. I just think we need some more tests.
We've done enough! For the first time in my life, I don't feel like a failure. I feel like me.
Dr. Octopus is born. Peter's work in the neural web was the key. Peter Parker has created one of his greatest foes. Doc's villain turn officially launches us into the final act. He's our true big bad, not Martin Lee, heralding Peter's third major failure. He's been so focused on his alter ego, on succeeding as Spider-Man, on taking down Martin Lee, that he hasn't paid enough attention to Otto, completely missing his descent into madness. This is tragic. Otto is the third character in this tale which embodies a duality of personalities. Peter Parker and Spider-Man, Martin Lee's pure soul versus Mr. Negative's darkness. And now Otto Octavius, the man who just wanted to help people, twisted and malformed into a being of pure hatred and madness. Octavius Industries, the whiteboard reads, creating the world you deserve. Who is the you in that phrase? Norman Osborn? In a matter of minutes, Peter, Otto, and Osborn's worlds will be transformed. At an Osborn rally in Times Square, he retrieves the Devil's Breath and releases it. The city tears itself apart in a matter of hours. But let's take a break from all that and swing our legs. We've been cooped up in this lab for too long.
I wanted to feel like Spider-Man. To me, that meant, physics taking over and a more visceral experience, like being a bob on a pendulum.
This is Jamie Fristrom, the man responsible for the web swinging in 2004's Spider-Man 2 movie tie-in game. The web swinging that revolutionized how we think about Spider-Man's movement to New York City. In this video, Nick Robinson has Jamie play Insomniac's Spider-Man for the first time to get his reaction. For a good web swinging system, you just want your stomach to clench up when you're at the bottom of a swing, he said, minutes before devouring Insomniac's gameplay. I could do this for hours. You would have thought I'd be kinda done. He's right to be so drawn in by Spidey's web. Insomniac's swinging is fluid, astonishingly animated, and above all, accessible. The team were determined to keep Spider-Man moving across the city, so with our chubby fingers firmly jammed into the R2 button, the plan is that Spider-Man will travel over rooftops no matter what. Rather than slamming into a wall, he'll just run right up it. If we skim along the side of a skyscraper, he'll sprint along the side before leaping off into another Thwip. Visually impressive yet easy to execute options pop up as we swing around. For example, with the L2 and R2 button, we can cinematically dash to surfaces, through water tanks and cranes, but realistically, you have to go out of your way to find these, adding a bit of spice that you need to set yourself up for. It's just a shame that these are the only two custom web zip animations we get, but for the first game in a new franchise, that might be a little greedy of me. Pressing X mid-air will zip us a little bit further, and if we time our release during swings, we can trade height for momentum and vice versa. Like I said, it's accessible. But the Spider-Man fantasy is alive here. This is partly because Peter's dialogue changes depending on if he's swinging or if his feet are on the ground, an attention to detail that nobody thought they needed until they played the game, but mainly because New York is built for swinging. It's a gift of a city because of the towering skyscrapers and organized grid system for traffic, meaning there are often periods where you can swing in a nice straight line with practically nothing to interrupt your flips and flair. In his GDC talk, Concrete Jungle Gym, Building Traversal and Marvel Spider-Man, Doug Sheehan said, "With swinging as our starting point, we decided on a few core beliefs that guided the feature's development. The first thing we acknowledged was targeting a broad audience. Spider-Man has a pretty big worldwide following, but we knew most gamers didn't have much muscle memory for swinging. To make it feel just right, we knew we had to get the controls to a point where they're easy to learn, but hard to master." Insomniac were determined to give us the illusion of webs actually sticking to buildings, something that actually does happen most of the time. It's really just mid-air web zips that don't, because that would get in the way of course correcting while swinging. No building, no billboard, no lamppost is off limits, regardless of how awkward their shape might be to design around. Fire escapes have a special animation where Spidey bounces off each metal bar while pulling himself up by his webs. A charge, sprint and jump means, if we're willing, we can sacrifice speed for height to give us an aerial start. The rumbles and knobs of signage like on the Oscorp building are ignored. Powerful leaps make web zipping a consistent, momentous means of getting around in areas like Central Park. It looks fantastic, and for a long time, it feels fantastic. Insomniac's mission statement was, play how a superhero movie feels. And because of the fluidity, that mission statement was stapled to my fingertips on a first playthrough. But by hour 15, you do start to notice some kinks in the traversal system, and personally, I felt a slight hunger for more. Momentum is key with Spider-Man's movement. You want to feel the swing, the highs, lows, and the sort of speed boost we remember from days on the playground, just transformed into a superhero fantasy on steroids. You speed up by launching him off a web, you use the point launch to throw him forwards, diving will arc him downwards so you can use the fall speed to link into your next swing. That momentum can also be interrupted because of the positions of buildings. Throwing Spider-Man up and over a tall building is slower than throwing him forwards in a straight line. Momentum is all about timing. If we're talking pure speed, this is where the challenge lies. The issue is that this challenge is hindered by trying to express yourself. Let's take the web zip, launching Spidey straight to a surface, ready to leap off and into the next action. Once you've activated it, you can't cancel it. Sometimes. It's never totally clear when you can cancel a web zip and when you can't, because sometimes you can zip off to the left and sometimes you're forced to magnetize to a surface. The same goes for if you want to web zip and then move fluidly into running up a wall. This doesn't happen, causing an awkward pause on the brickwork before Spidey makes another move. While the dive is a great way of fluidly dropping your height, it doesn't ever feel quite as fast as you'd like. Later in the DLC, Peter will tell Miles that he does numerous equations in a split second when web swinging, figuring out his distance to the closest building, the strength of the webs, his body weight. However, in gameplay, he does all of this for us. After all, nobody wants to do sums while they're trying to feel like Spider-Man. But that doesn't mean all friction should be missing. A balance needs to be struck, and in the name of accessibility, Insomniac leaned away from it. There's no way to shorten or lengthen webs when swinging. Your web will be exactly as long as it needs to be to attach to a nearby building because that is a top priority for Insomniac. It's the question everyone asks when an open world Spidey game is being made, and it was one of their core traversal pillars. But once that web has attached, responsiveness could be added by letting us extend the length of our webs for a longer swing or shorter for a faster swing. When web swinging in Insomniac's Spider-Man, the player has just two points of input: the entrance to a swing and the exit. The entrance is all about choosing when to push the R2 button, and the exit is all about how you come out. Do you release for more speed, or do you leap for more height in those patented Spider-Man acrobatics? During the swing is when you lose your control, and unfortunately this is not something the sequels would tweak. What would eventually be tweaked is fall damage, but for now, Spidey will always hit the pavement with a classic superhero landing, no matter how far he falls. This is especially true when doing tricks. Holding down square will let Spidey flip and somersault and spin, but the way it's mapped is a little awkward because doing a backflip means we need to pull back on the analog stick, and pulling back on the analog stick slows the webhead down. If we keep flipping as he falls, Spidey won't faceplant. Instead, he'll clumsily force his way out of the trick so his feet hit the ground. Tricks give us a measly 2 XP per move, so we're not really extrinsically rewarded for pulling them off. They're there purely for flair. That's fine, but if they are just for the sake of the player's sense of whimsy, I'd have expected more options, more tricks, and more risk associated with them. Elsewhere, we get experience points for specific traversal challenges. For example, using the point launch system 500 times awards 50 XP. For context, completing a single campaign objective like speaking to Otto in his lab awards at least 1000 XP. The rewards here for creatively exploring traversal options are so minimal that there's not much of an incentive to play with these systems. Giving the traversal system its own currency, like backpack tokens or crying tokens, would increase our determination as a player to engage with the traversal, rather than passively use R2 and X to swing about the city. And then, there's the parkour, something best shown at our next objective, the Raft, New York's Supermax prison.
It was a coordinated attack. Must have been planned from the outside. Every cell block is breached. We're minutes away from every prisoner and Rikers walking right up 5th Avenue.
This is 20 minutes of pure unbridled spectacle, battling through our newest enemy faction, the Raft prisoners. The framing of a prison breakout is a violent, high-octane race against time, and this is one hell of a way to start a final act. Max Dillon, aka Electro, has whirled through the space, tumbling concrete, electrifying pylons, and goads Spidey into a chase. It's an obvious trap, but that doesn't matter. The chase is on. Peter Parker's parkour skills pop up in cultivated levels and the open world. Running up elevator shafts, swinging to lampposts, leaping off of cars. These are flashy and smooth, and they boil down to the R2 button. Look at the footage on screen, look at the sweet leaps and spins that the webhead's doing as he chases Electro. I'm not doing that, Spider-Man is. I'm just holding down the trigger button, leaving a distinct disconnect to Pete's movement and the action the player is taking. It's through that swinging and parkour that Spider-Man collides with Electro. The field of vision closes in on Spidey during parkour so we can appreciate the authenticity of his animations, and then moves back when swinging so we still have Spider-Man as the focus, but also so that speed is aesthetically increased, even when you're hitting the speed cap. The camera's the unsung hero here. It's where playing like a superhero movie feels comes to bear. Reaching Electro on the roof of the raft, the rest of the Sinister 5 make their move. Scorpion, Rhino, Electro, Vulture, and Mr. Negative kick Spidey in the dirt. On a good day, he might be able to take on 2, maybe 3 of his greatest villains, but all of them at once? It's too much. And then their leader steps out of the darkness, the mastermind behind the prison break, and everything goes to hell.
Dr. Octavius. First and final warning. Stay out of our way.
So, let's talk about the Sinister Six. To the amazing Spider Mail. You keep making Spidey grow and gain new powers only to take them away, or better yet, forget that he even has them. How long until you decide that we need Peter down and out on his luck again and take that from him? I guess the main point of this letter is, do not get rid of Peter Parker! For crying out loud, Miles is a good character, but he's no Peter Parker. Miguel O'Hara is Spidey 2099. At least Ben Reilly might have been Peter Parker. I love reading Marvel, and I'm sure I will continue to do so, but do not replace Peter. Anonymous. The year is 1964. Dr. Octopus summons Vulture, Electro, Mysterio, Sandman, and Kraven the Hunter to his apartment, and they form the Sinister Six for Spider-Man Annual Number 1. It is a fine story. The annual is mainly a cameo fest so Marvel can advertise their other comics. Thor nearly knocks Spidey down while flying off to an unimportant Avengers meeting. 4 panels are spent on Doctor Strange going for a walk. The real star of the show is Doc Ock's plan. He takes Spidey's girlfriend Betty Brant hostage. Also Aunt May's here too. Now, dear, Aunt May says, we mustn't be prejudiced against the poor man just because he seems to have some trouble with his arms. The Sinister Six combine their talents by teaming up and fight Spider-Man in separate locations independent of each other for some reason. Electro gets the power plant, Kraven gets the zoo, Sandman gets a construction site. You get the idea. Insomniac's Octavius has more of a cultivated plan, with strands spreading out to every corner of the city and backups for his backups. In the space of hours, Ock has achieved what has taken Martin Lee weeks to plot and plan. The Sinister Six split up initially, but when we finally lock heads with them, they're teaming up for some capital S spectacle boss fights.
It's over, Norman. Time to give them the truth.
One of the greatest criticisms levied against Spidey 1 is that suddenly all of the really good stuff is held captive until the final act. Electro, Vulture, Scorpion, and Rhino suddenly appear with very little in the way of introduction unless you're interrogating the world building and devouring Jameson's show. But frankly, I think all of the villains get just enough time to breathe before we take them down, with the single, unfortunate exception of Vulture. Sorry, pal. By the time the credits roll, we don't just battle 6 of Spidey's rogues, we battle 11. Just like Rocksteady all those years ago, Insomniac get that some face time with supervillains is part of the joy of a superhero game, and they're not stingy. Fisk, Shocker, Taskmaster, Tombstone, Negative, Scorpion, Rhino, Vulture, Electro, Dr. Octopus, and Screwball. We'll get to you later, you annoying goofball, I love you. So it's with the Sinister 11 in mind that it's finally time to turn to how the game handles its boss fights, because there's a consistent through line here that was thankfully iterated on for Miles Morales and the sequel. Almost every boss in the base game follows the same formula. We can't punch them, so we need to throw objects at them or use our gadgets to web them up first. We then zip in for a couple of smacks or maybe a finisher and then dart away again. Rinse and repeat. Some bosses are more fluid with this approach than others, but it's the game's presentation which truly makes its boss fights, not the mechanics themselves. We've already talked about Wilson Fisk, but let's run through the rest of our villains so nobody feels left out, and so there isn't any room for doubt.
Hi, Herman.
Seriously?
In Amazing Spider-Man 22, the 2022 issue, not the 1964 one, what can I say, comics are weird, Herman Schultz, aka Shocker, asks Black Cat, "Who do you think I am?" And she replies, "A palate cleanser for the hero who's fought everyone?" Insomniac's Shocker is no different. Hours before Devil's Breath turns the city into a pandemic's ground zero, Shocker went on a robbing, heisting rampage. He's appeared in almost every single Spider-Man game, so it would have been shocking, if we didn't get a proper one-on-one with our angry boy. We kick his ass in an evacuated bank. The wide open space encourages us to swing around rather than remain on the ground. Shocker blasts away at us and we have to keep dodging him while throwing debris his way to stun him. But Shocker shakes things up this early on by having a second stage and a third stage. Whoa, Herman, don't put yourself out for my sake, you're spoiling me. Taskmaster's unique because he's an open world fight that comes in as a reward for completing all of his challenges. He might be testing Spider-Man as a combatant, but that doesn't mean he holds back. He ambushes us while swinging around and forces us to fight him on a nearby rooftop.
If you know my moves, you know I'm gonna wreck you.
Surprise me, if you can.
Taskmaster started out life as an Avengers villain. Reductively, he can copy your moves, so we get 2 sparring matches against him that's a distinct bust up in difficulty. We dodge his attacks, web him up, throw debris his way to stun him, and then kick him a bit. The novelty adds a lot, as does the surprise on a first playthrough. It's a fun fight that repeats the same stun gimmick as elsewhere because we can't hurt him until he's stunned.
Can we say your crazy drug lord days are done? Please?
Sure. For now.
Tombstone's fight is claustrophobic because it's a low-ceiling garage. The goal isn't to beat him down because he's indestructible, so really, we need to get our finisher gauge up nice and high so Spidey can inject him with a cure that makes him hurt. He brings in aimless grunts to get in our way, always a sign that a developer doesn't have faith in a boss's own mechanics, and that's a shame because there is a varied moveset here. All together now, we dodge his attacks, web him up, throw debris his way to stun him, and then kick him until that finisher gauge is high enough to take him out. With the D-listers down, let's turn to the big six.
Alexei, I've followed your career with great interest. The world sees you as a witless dullard. I see a warrior with a poet's heart.
Spidey tracks Otto's signal to a warehouse right off Times Square. This room, this space, is indicative of some real stumbles and falls with how the game handles the exposition of its big bads. Including the DLC, we get 4 separate points where we basically find a villain room, I'd hesitate to call them layers, where Pete just wanders around, examines some objects, and a bad guy's motivation is spilled out through some gear on a table. I mean, Christ, the joke's been made already, but we learn about Devil's Breath through a PowerPoint presentation. Getting a rundown on how ARK recruited each member of the Sinister Six, such as wiping Scorpion's debts, is at least development, but it feels rushed. A quick starter for 10 before we punch them in the jaw.
Trap failed? Softened him up. Time for plan B.
When it comes to the boss fights for the Six, they're sculpted by each villain's feel. Electro's all about electricity, but he's best as an aerial combatant, and his moves complement Adrian Toomes, aka the Vulture. The two have teamed up a few times in the comics outside of the Sinister Six, and that's reflected in how naturally they work together here. Electro's even got a cute nickname for him and everything. In return for taking control of the power plant, Otto promises Electro that he'll find a way to turn him into pure energy, something he actually achieved in 2001's Enter Electro game. Great fight. The aerial battle against Vulture and Electro is one of the best bosses in the game. It's just a shame that this is the first time Spider-Man gets a basic conversation with Vulture in the whole story. A brief chase mission where Vulture breaks out of the raft and we have to chase him down in Act 2 would have mitigated this sense of homelessness when it comes to Spider-Man's relationship with Vulture. He's the first supervillain with powers that Spidey ever fought, so I wish there was a tad more love given to his presence in the world. But hey, at least the aerial combat's fun, swinging around the Oscorp power plant, dodging Electro's lightning and Vulture's, Actually, what are these? Wing knives? It's the presentation and the tone which makes this fight feel great. We need special circumstances to hurt Electro, but considering his sparky touch, it feels more natural here than when fighting, say, Shocker. And it's all balanced out by the fact we can smack Vulture around whenever we like.
I'd end it now, but Octavius is paying, and he wants to torture you, which I respect.
Before our fight, Mac Gargan, aka Scorpion, poisons us, forcing Spider-Man to swing through a hallucinatory city with tails rising ominously out of the mist, dodging them as they lash out. While Scorpion's mission works as a solid introduction, his fight is probably the easiest of the Sinister Six. You chuck an impact web at him, he falls over, you hit him a bit, rinse and repeat. It's clear that the dream sequence's purpose is less to have fun with Scorpion as a villain and more to reinforce Pete's internal conflict after creating Doc Ock. Visions of our old mentor haunt us, blaming us for his transformation. But through it all, Pete is clinging to the sense that Octavius is just sick. He'll help him, because he's goddamn Spider-Man. If Dr. Octopus is a creation of Peter Parker, Scorpion is a creation of J. Jonah Jameson. This was during the Stan Lee and Steve Ditko era, when Jonah was more of a threat to Spidey than just a nuisance. He hired Gargan as a private investigator and eventually commissioned the green suit to turn him into a hired killer, trapping him inside. Jonah hired Scorpion to kill Spider-Man. In the story, he eventually learned the error of his ways, and barely 5 issues later created the bloody Spider Slayer to try this whole sorry mess again. Early comics Jonah sucks. The Scorpion we get is a violent criminal with a poisoning fetish. Jonah's words, not mine.
Pick on someone your own size, Rhino.
There is no one my size, poke.
Alexei Sitsevich, the Rhino, bears no resemblance to the blockhead from the animated series or whatever the hell Paul Giamatti was supposed to be in the Garfield movies. He's a terrifying boulder of a man mashed into a suit too tight. And he's my favourite out of the 11th hour villains we've covered. We fight down by the dockyard with Scorpion supporting, effectively built up as a threat thanks to Miles' encounter with him earlier. Not only is the battle bloody hilarious in how Rhino and Scorpion are ribbing each other the whole time, calling each other thick, weak or puny, but Spider-Man's environmental options have been upgraded here, swinging heavy containers at Rhino to take him out. We can't land a hit unless he's stunned, classic, but I appreciate Insomniac didn't rely on old tricks here. Typically, when we fought Rhino in a Spidey game, he's tossed into the classic tactic of make big guy run into wall, big guy stuns himself. Instead, Insomniac makes this a more active battle, where we have to actively interrupt Rhino's charge attack, and I respect that. He's one of the later Sinister Six villains when looking at his comics history, first appearing in Amazing Spider-Man number 42. He was just a big angry dude called Alex O'Hearn, later retconned by a goddamn encyclopedia to be Alexei Sitsevich. I told you, comics are weird. There, he was a freelance mercenary that would go on to be represented in court by Matt Murdock, Daredevil. And fun fact, despite being a Spider-Man staple by this point, he mainly kept showing up in Hulk comics during the early days.
I'm okay.
Didn't you tell me something once about accepting that I'm human just like everyone else?
You and Ben. Masters at turning my own words against me.
Aunt May is sick. She's caught Devil's Breath. If we don't find an antidote, she'll die. But don't worry, May, Mary Jane Watson's on the case for some reason. MJ learns that Oscorp are working on a cure, so heads to Norman Osborn's penthouse to figure out where it is. Here she catches a little eight-legged stowaway looking for an anxious teen to bite, and sees that Harry Osborn is not in Europe. He's actually sick with the same illness that killed his mother. Devil's Breath has been developed to cure him, and the post-credits teach us that Norman has a plan B. Devil's Breath originates from the comics as well. In fact, it's a key part of Mr. Negative's first appearance in Brand New Day. It was a genetic virus, just like here, but on the page, you could code it using someone's blood and teach it to only kill that person's relatives. Negative uses it to take down rival crime families. Now, Martin Lee has lost all interest in Devil's Breath. Otto beat him to the punch, and New York is already rumbling at the news it was created by Oscorp. He's just out for a little old-fashioned revenge.
Lee's pain. His anger. It's fueling his power.
Martin Lee is a product of Oscorp. A parallel is drawn here where we see that Osborn experimented on him in an effort to create Devil's Breath, unlocking his power. Good intentions given over to apathy and cruelty, the same way Otto's efforts to create a better world have spiraled into the monster he's become. During what should have been just a consultation, Osborn grew impatient and began tests early. Martin's power erupted, killing his parents, and Mr. Negative was born. This is just one of the reasons Otto hates Osborn, but it's surely the catalyst. He arrived just after the tests began. The blame for what happened to Martin lies with Norman, but Otto has internalized that guilt and feels responsible. Perhaps his efforts to create robotic prosthetics for veterans was his way of trying to make amends for the horrors he was complicit in all those years ago. Tonight, Martin Lee has captured Norman Osborn. He questions why Spider-Man wants to save scum like this, scum like Osborn, and Spidey doesn't answer, but we know why. It's because Spider-Man tries to save everyone, no matter who they are, reinforced by his cries that he's trying to save Lee from the darkness within him. Mr. Negative's boss fight rocks. The pomp and spectacle of the Negative Zone is just one part. The other is because he's one of just a couple of battles where he's not completely invulnerable to our basic attacks. If our dodge game is on point, we can use that against him to get a fair few blows in. Lee does summon some lesser enemies to try and ambush us, but Spidey can take each one down in one hit, so they're more set dressing than a distraction from the battle itself. When all is said and done, Mr. Negative is one of the strongest boss fights in the game. His defeat is just a setback for Otto, who crashes into the facility, knocks Spider-Man out, and steals both Osborn and the Devil's Breath cure.
Ready for your final act?
Let's officially turn to our old friend. Dear Stan and Steve, I'm disappointed that the Sinister Six, with all their collective brains and skills, didn't put up a better fight against the web spinner. Only the Vulture came up with much of a new approach, depriving Spider-Man of his web. You notice that no villain lasted longer than 4 pages. Even a non-criminal with any sense could see that the evildoers would have to team up to really get anywhere. But this is only a minor complaint about an otherwise superb effort on your part. Kenneth S. Gallagher. While the city lies in flames, destruction left in the wake of Otto's attack, Pete asks MJ, when is it okay to give up on a friend? In his essay, Spidey's Tangled Web of Obligations, Fighting Friends and Dependents Gone Bad, the philosopher Christopher Robichaud might have the answer. That's right, I tricked you. You thought we wouldn't do philosophy because this is a Spider-Man video, but you can't escape. Like and subscribe. Quote, we have special obligations to those closest to us, friends, family, and dependents. Peter's relationships give him the duty to do what he can to help them abandon their villainous ways and reform their lives. He may fail at this, but he's not permitted to simply walk away from the task. Peter feels personally responsible for what Otto has become. He failed to catch the villain turn before it happened. He helped design his arms. He understands that there's a moral obligation to help Otto or Martin Lee, even if that help renders them unconscious first. Otto has taken Osborn hostage at Oscorp Tower. Try saying that 5 times fast. Despite the fact that the game has many threads waiting to be resolved, it all ends with a simple, effective superhero trope of baddie takes the mayor hostage. The setting of the battle tastes like a climax, bleakly painted against the night sky. Despite the monstrous things he's done, Peter saves Norman and prepares to save his old friend. When answering Pete's question, MJ tells him, "You need to ask if the Otto you knew is still in there, or if he never existed at all. Was Otto always like this?" Through continuous intervals at the lab, we learn that the tentacles will affect his brain. Mood swings will rise like waves. His physical body will break down even further. He'll forget himself. Otto's fear was that the muscular disease that ravaged him would leave him trapped with a mind that his broken body couldn't use. A fear like that can change a person. But then, he participated in Norman Osborn's trials on Martin Lee. Sure, he missed the physical tests. Sure, he thought they were just in the consultation phase, but he was considering experimenting on a child. Before Octavius became Octopus, he was already taking an interest in Spider-Man's foes. Was this purely as a scientist, or has the Raft's prison break always been something he's been thinking about? When we go back to the lab, the whiteboard is unrecognizable. Octavius Industries, it says. Creating the world I deserve. The comic book arrogance wears Otto's face. There's nothing under his mask now, only spite and hate. Otto's boss battle was one of the first things Insomniac worked on, and even though they've confessed they wanted to do even more with it, it stands as a tragic, terrible triumph, pulling in a lot of the best bits from other fights. The spectacle is astonishing, but it's the emotion of the thing that hurts. It's full of variety without losing the core Spider-Man experience. We have to swing from antenna to antenna, we have to dodge missiles, use our gadgets, environmental attacks. Ock packs a powerful punch, and just like with Mr. Negative, we can still smack him upside the head even if he isn't stunned. Webbing is still the #1 strategy, because it's the best way to get some uninterrupted smacks in. And just listen to the theme music. The use of the heavy brass gives weight to the action, like Ock's dangerous arms smashing down and interrupting the more agile, spindly string section of Spider-Man. When Brian Intihar sat down with Kinda Funny for their Spider-Man spoiler cast, he said, "We toyed with the idea of him staying a good guy until the end, but we felt like it wasn't working with what we wanted to do. It's hard to throw Octavius in the game and then surprise people that he's going to become Doc Ock, and we ask you to go back to the lab a lot and see him change slowly. But that final fight doesn't mean as much if we don't invest the time into that slow burn."
Such a disappointment. Parker.
You knew?
It's in this climax that the duality between Peter Parker and Spider-Man becomes one. With the revelation that Otto knew his identity all along, the two sides align with each other. It wasn't Dr. Octopus that's betrayed him, it was Otto too. This is personal. "You were my hero," Pete roars. "I worshipped you!" Otto's attack on New York put Pete's loved ones in danger. He might not have taken Aunt May hostage, he might not have attacked MJ directly, but he knew that they would get hurt because all of New York has been hurt by what he's done. And it's as Peter leaves Otto behind, the anti-serum in hand, a thought. Not a single villain dies in this game. It's all too common for Spider-Man villains to die by their own hand in Spidey adaptations, but in Insomniac's iteration, every single villain lives, locked away. The ultimate irony when the credits roll is that a lot of people die in this game, a lot of good people, but Spider-Man sticks to his code. You can't save everyone. But that doesn't mean you give up on them. It's like Bill Roseman said, Spider-Man never stops trying. Just because he got knocked down multiple times, that doesn't mean he stops getting up.
You knew?
I've known for a while.
I never wanted you to worry.
I did. And I am so proud of you.
At the start of the game, Peter and Spidey had to make a choice. Pete's life or Spider-Man's responsibilities, his bills or Kingpin. At the time it felt easy, feeling like Spider-Man comes out on top every time, but in our closing moments, The mask falls away. May or New York. There's only one vial of anti-serum. He can use it now to save Aunt May, or give it to the authorities to mass produce it. If he does, it won't reach her in time. For a split second, Pete goes to use the vial to save her, but he holds himself back. It's his responsibility to be the man who saves everyone, even if it hurts like hell. I love that Mary Jane, for a split second, almost out of shot, decides to give the boy and his aunt their time together. I love that Peter thinks he'll have to be with May in her last moments as Spider-Man rather than her nephew. But most of all, I love that with her last words, May gives Peter one last gift and one last lesson. She takes that burden from him. She confesses that she always knew he was Spider-Man. Why is this a gift when Otto's reveal is a betrayal? Both Otto and May knew that Peter was Spider-Man. Both don't let on how long they've known his secret. Both reveal it at the crux of the story. Both have had big twist reveals like this already in the comics. After all, Spider-Man's a soap opera, and after 60 years with the same cast of characters, how many big twists are left? Otto uses Pete's secret identity against him. He's not just been studying Spider-Man, he's been studying Peter as well. The Sinister Six comment on how brilliant he is, how it seems like he's prepared for every eventuality, but that preparation comes from the fact Peter let him into his life. Peter let Ock design his new suit, the suit he wore to battle his fiercest foes. It's one of the things that makes the anti-Ock suit such a powerful beat in the closing chapter. Pete uses his own brains and his own smarts to outmaneuver his mentor. Mechanically, it refreshes his gadgets. Otto's advanced suit didn't gift him that, and gadgets are the main way we take down our bosses. Aunt May knew Peter's secret and never used it against him. She never mentioned to Peter how great it would be if Spider-Man became the new face of Feast, for example, something I'm sure Pete is just waiting for her or Martin Lee to suggest. She encouraged the man under the mask, not the mask itself, and she never held it against Pete for deceiving her. She knew it was always with the best intentions. "Let me see my nephew," she says. During the battle at Oscorp Tower, Otto barks about how other people don't understand, how the citizens of New York are beneath them, dreaming up the scenario that Octavius and Spider-Man are somehow better than everyone else. Otto obviously isn't. His brilliant mind isn't enough to elevate him, but Spider-Man is. He has a great power. We experience how he physically looks down on the population of New York when swinging around and leaping through the air. Spider-Man is the best of us. Peter Parker is the flawed one. He's the one who makes mistakes, sacrificing reliability and happy relationships, a secure place in society so that he can protect people and fulfill his responsibility. It's when standing at May's bed that once again the two men fuse to become something greater. In this moment, Peter holds the fate of the city in the palm of his hand, not the spider. He is above everyone, making a decision that could rock New York's foundation. If he gives Aunt May the cure, he'll be helping someone at the sake of helping everyone. And that was never May's belief. Putting the bottle down and holding May's hand as she passes is the most powerful and responsible thing that he can do. Dear Mr. Wacker, Ms. Pyle, and Mr. Slot, it is my belief and hope that Dan loves Peter Parker as much as we fans do. And make no mistake, we love Peter Parker. We love Spider-Man, but please know that the man under the mask is why we do. Spider-Man would not have succeeded if Stan Lee had not put Peter under that mask. Peter Parker's loyal fan, Elijah Barga. In October of 2018, Spider-Man's lead writer, John Paquette, told Polygon, "We see how people are reacting to certain characters. We see what people enjoy as part of the main game, and then we ask ourselves, how do we give them more of that? Then at the same time, how do we give them something that feels new and fresh? So our strategy with the DLC is to focus on distinct characters. The city that never sleeps is more Spider-Man, capital M, capital S, capital M. Very little has changed here from the base game, but there is a substantial amount to do see swing and kick that ties neat bows around a couple of dangling threads from the base game. The DLC answers questions raised like resolving Silver Sable's arc from villain to anti-hero, or setting Yuri on a path that comic fans would expect, or giving us divine retribution in the form of a screwball takedown. But its first episode, The Heist, kicks off with Black Cat.
I like your new tricks.
And I'm tired of your old ones. Weren't you gonna stop stealing art?
Who said I'm here for the art?
Here's a question, why do you think so many soups have cat femme fatales? Where does the cat come from? Is it Freudian, and why am I asking that? Moving on. The opening mission of the heist has my favourite level design in the entire game. The crime families have all started to grow more confident now Fisk and the demons are put away, so Spidey gets a call that there's a break-in at the Museum of Contemporary Modern Art. Maddeningly, it's in the DLC that we finally get a single stealth level that feels designed for stealth, with segmented walls blocking enemies away from each other. Even if things get a bit chaotic, web zipping through tactically placed vents allows us to leap around, tackle 4 enemies, leap back, web up a few more, and keep the battle feeling busy while not feeling overwhelming. And tossing priceless art at thugs is a riot, though it kinda undermines the fact we're trying to stop the goons from stealing it. Over the course of the heist, we and Peter are sucked into Felicia Hardy's world. Her manipulation of Spider-Man by claiming she has a son, and worse, implying that Pete is the father, is callous. In fact, it's abusive. She gaslights him, lies to him, stitches him up, and at the end, ghosts him in the extreme by faking her death. Seriously, fuck Felicia, she's sexy but she sucks. Black Cat broke into Spider-Man's comics in 1979 with The Amazing Spider-Man 194, waiting a total of 11 pages before seducing Spidey and throwing off his spider sense. She also takes milk baths. Don't ask. The saying goes that Felicia loves Spider-Man, not Peter. That's not strictly true anymore. In fact, she's been brought into Pete's inner circle in more recent runs, but when talking about Insomniac's Black Cat, it certainly is. The reveal that Pete and Felicia have a sexual history is a neat twist, and it gives the writers an opportunity to present Pete and MJ as extremely healthy in comparison. It isn't long before Pete bravely confesses everything to MJ. Total honesty is important between these two, a contrast to his old relationship with Felicia.
You know that she and I dated for a while.
Yeah, so? Oh, are you serious?
MJ has natural reservations, potentially dating the father of Black Cat's son. Felicia's involvement in the City That Never Sleeps is necessary for how Pete and MJ are characterized here. After 30 hours of bickering, the game finally ends with them moving in together, determined to try and start fresh. We get to see them flirt again, have banter, work together as equal partners in this whole saving the day thing. But the heist also introduces a brand new mini arc for Pete to follow.
Then why are you stealing it?
If I don't, they'll kill my son.
The concept of fatherhood is introduced with Felicia. He begins to panic about having a son. He and MJ both consider the type of dad he would be. After all, Pete can barely look after himself, never mind a kid. It's all framed by a side mission where we collect paintings across the city while learning about Walter Hardy, Felicia's father, and the original Black Cat. Introducing this concept through Felicia is clever because even though it all turns out to be bullshit, the colour of Pete as a father has been established to later be capitalised on in his relationship with Miles. At the end of the base game, Miles gets bitten by Osborn's spider and reveals his secret to Pete, looking for some help from his role model. Pete's relationship to Miles is less of him as a father figure and more as a big brother, but it's still all set up for Spider-Man Miles Morales. Pete rewards Miles' trust in kind, revealing his identity as Spider-Man, which, side note, means they were both pretending this table was heavy the whole time. While swinging around, we have numerous chats with Miles where Peter is reluctantly mentoring him, and this all coalesces at the end when the two begin to officially train. While the plot of The City That Never Sleeps is all about Hammerhead, the story is actually all about our hero becoming the Otto to Miles' Peter. But overall, this DLC is greater than the sum of its parts, because the pacing is a mess here. A lot of our main missions are introductions to side content or new types of active crime that aren't really new types of crime, with the exception of Spider-Bot's bombs, but who wants to do those for 5 hours?
Wait a minute, Screwball? Ugh, don't tell me you're out of jail.
I sure am! And I brought some of my fans with me!
I love the Screwball challenges. We all like to diss her, but her standing in Spider-Man 1 reminds me of the Riddler's standing in Arkham. She's a wonderful nuisance that we love to hate, and her missions are as good if not better than the Taskmaster challenges. She's set beat-em-ups, EMP challenges, drone challenges, gadget challenges, and stealth challenges. The whole gimmick of photobombs brings a dynamic twist to these missions, separating Screwball from Taskmaster and making them feel unique. Her stealth stuff introduces motion sensors into the mix. The gadget challenges are specifically a lot of fun. To the point I wish there were a couple more of these, but I guess that speaks to how the gadgets don't synergize as nicely as Insomniac originally would have thought. Restricting us to just needing to use 2 particular gadgets to take down enemies is fantastic, and forcing the player to start thinking about the environment more creatively is spectacular. Needing to use the suspension matrix to launch enemies into the air and then activating a tripwire to slap them to the ground made me see these gadgets in a brand new way that the main game never did. Eventually, we unlock our long-awaited showdown. Completing all of her challenges results in a citywide chase across the rooftops. It is frustrating that this content wasn't in the base game, but examining Marvel's Spider-Man as a full package, it's a great conclusion to the Screwball story. It incorporates a lot of her earlier challenges, feeling like a natural escalation. We have to use her photobomb opportunities, deactivating bombs, flying through water tanks, shooting down drones and so on, so we can keep pace. Also, fun fact, during the Superior Spider-Man run, Otto Octavius literally breaks every bone in Screwball's body. Fun, that's fun! This was Comic Facts with Monty. The heist ends with a bang, literally. The mysterious Hammerhead has been forcing Felicia to steal some digital drives which have the major assets of New York's crime families on them. Felicia betrays us, her son doesn't exist, and Hammerhead's men rig her penthouse to blow as revenge for crossing him. Boom.
Spidey, check it out.
Nice.
That's not regulation, Lieutenant.
Sorry, Captain. Birthday present from the kid. Not every day you run ops with the man, you know?
I'll let it slide. This time. Now get back on the ready line.
If the heist is all about Felicia Hardy, Turf Wars is all about Yuri Watanabe and establishing Hammerhead as an overarching villain. We open by laying siege to his headquarters in the Harlem Sanatorium. We are going to witness firsthand the origin story of Yuri Watanabe's costumed alter ego, Wraith. Hammerhead is presented as a takes no prisoners type of villain. He's remained quiet in the days since Fisk went away, but now he's popping his ugly, massive head out of the window and shaking his ass at the people in New York, essentially goading Spidey into facing him. We think of Yuri as a new addition to Spider-Man, and for laymen, she was one of the more unrecognizable faces when the game came out. On the page, she was forgettable. By the time she takes the spotlight during the No One Dies arc, her and Spidey have barely had a conversation. It takes a catastrophic amount of evil in the form of the villain Massacre for her to start to break. He straps bombs to a group of hostages and detonates 8 of them. Failing to stop that breaks a person. It's her first step into darkness. Insomniac wisely embed her in the base game so that what happens in Turf War carries more weight. Massacre isn't here, but Hammerhead is.
Course used to be. We earned your respect. You hit us, we hit back. Made you know your place.
Joseph Hammerhead Martello isn't like Otto or Martin Lee. He's a one-note bastard because he's a one-note bastard. He kills Yuri's men in front of her. All of them. Time to bring the fear back, he says, because that's his whole plan. Seize the gang territories through fear. Or at least that's what he claims, because he spends most of his time hiding underground, watching his men do the dirty work for him, and it's worth mentioning that a lot of time and energy clearly went into making the Hammerhead gang feel different from the other enemy factions in the game. It would have been all too easy to just throw some standard thugs our way, or write it off as Hammerhead hired some raft prisoners to work for him, but Insomniac wrote new dialogue, got new voice actors, and designed a few new looks for these standard enemies, even if they are mechanically the same as the other factions. So let's talk about the DLC's combat. We get a couple new enemy types here. Insomniac saw that everyone loved the irritating jetpack enemies and the bothersome shield enemies and thought, let's combine the two and ruin everyone's day. And oh boy, do they ruin everyone's day. These guys can suck a dick, and you can't use the tried and true strategies for the shield enemies because their rush attack leaves behind a red energy field which hurts and staggers you while momentarily deactivating your gadgets. You have got to rethink your plan of attack. They're not poorly designed on their own by any stretch, but all too often you have to face 4 or 5 of them at the same time, whilst also trying to handle things like the minigun enemy introduced in the heist, and eventually the super armoured Hammerhead goons that appear in episode 3. That latter enemy type essentially boils down to a reskin and an increased health bar, and they swarm like wasps into 2 new base types.
I'm surprised Sable had you working alone on this.
I resigned from Sable International in order to ensure the supplies made it to Sankaria.
Guess she's a true mercenary at heart, even choosing weapons over aid for her own people.
Sable is more than a mercenary. Trust me.
These are tough. In fact, the whole DLC is built for a fully leveled Spider-Man. Hammerhead's fronts have a true sense of variety that means they don't necessarily have a consistent identity like, say, the Fisk construction sites. but they are a visual feast to fight through, even if the real challenge comes in the Olympus bases. Their layouts are larger while having more awkward geometry to swing around, teeming with high damage, difficult to take down enemies to keep us on our toes. David Obademi, a reluctant Sable enforcer, is the voice in our ear here because he's on a mission to rescue the humanitarian supplies stolen by Hammerhead. It adds some grey to Sable's monochrome colour palette, while using David as a vehicle to teach us more about the good work Silver Sable's been doing in her home of Symkaria. The civil war that tears apart that country tugs at MJ, and soon she'll be preparing to go there and broadcast that pain to the world. Pete's growth is solidified when he encourages her to go, despite how dangerous it might be. While the bases are fun combat challenges in themselves, David's inclusion sets a new standard for how Insomniac can thread narrative through these. Completing them all shows how Spidey's Peter side soaks into his crime fighting. We get our new pal a work visa at a school in New York.
You didn't need to call for backup. I really did. You don't think we can drive a guy a few blocks?
Have you seen what's going on out there? I don't trust anybody.
As far as the tone of Turf Wars is concerned, Spider Cop is the name of the game. The webhead spends a lot of the DLC tailing, eavesdropping and following Magia thugs, particularly showcased when we send Spiderbot into the bar with no name. This is a direct location often used in the comics. It's not just a hidey hole for gangsters and thugs, it's ultimately where a lot of Spidey's big bads spend their nights off. Purely because of the detail in the location, like the Kingpin arcade machine we have to hide beneath, this mission is a standout. It's effective in setting up a location that's full of life before we return to it later and see the carnage Yuri has exacted on the residents.
Where are you going?
To teach a lesson in fear.
Whoa, 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 whoa. Deep breath.
You can move, or I can arrest you.
Yes, I regret wearing this suit here. After rumbling Hammerhead's schemes, he welcomes us into his final plan. He might be dressed in Sable power armor, but the mafioso still leaks out. He tries to drown his competition in concrete. He can't help himself, meaning Turf Wars ends with Spider-Man succeeding in what he tried to do in the base game. He saves the bad guys. Hammerhead's body is impenetrable, but the real problem is the big metal plate in his big metal head. His boss acts as a tougher version of the SHIELD jetpack enemies who have gotten on our nerves for the past 2 hours, and to add insult to injury, he summons lesser foes as well. While I'm glad this episode at least has a boss fight, it's forgettable. But what comes after matters more than taking down the bad guy.
Last time we met, you said something about fear. How do you feel now?
Just dandy.
The thing that makes street-level stories like this so impactful with superheroes is that if you refuse to focus on the end of the world, that frees up time for sincere character beats. Dan Slott's big time storyline isn't remembered for the gang war, it's remembered for the death of Marla Madison Jameson. A single issue where we follow Peter and Jonah after her death where not a single word is said or written, and we see the masks of both men pulled back. Turf Wars, and by association the city that never sleeps, won't be remembered for Hammerhead's street-level schemes. Writing and now voicing this script, I still couldn't tell you any of the minutiae of his plan, but it will be remembered for Yuri. She nearly kills Hammerhead in cold blood, only saved by Spider-Man, and the tragedy is that our intervention doesn't matter. She will go on to become a serial killer who targets mobsters. Through recordings left for us, accompanied by ropes in the colours of her new alter ego, Wraith, she documents a period where she and a therapist tried to take down a Magia enforcer, ultimately leading to the death of her friend. When we find them all, she calls us, sadly telling Spider-Man to stay out of her way and that she will continue killing. It's DLC that recontextualizes how we see Yuri, how we approach her no-nonsense attitude on repeat playthroughs. Just like Otto, how much of this was always in there. In episode 3, Silver Linings, that recontextualization continues with Silver Sable.
Who do you work for?
He works for Hammerhead.
Where is this Hammerhead?
Whoa, whoa! Can't we, go grab a coffee and catch up like normal people?
While swinging around the city, MJ points out that Spidey's got a lot of challenging women in his life. Sylvia Sablanova is no exception. In the base game, Sable is essentially just a threatening gun-for-hire who locks heads with the webhead at a few random points. She brings a final enemy faction with her, but independent of that, her presence in the story is a pure vehicle for the city lockdown plot. Now, she's back, bringing with her a lot of the cut content Insomniac said they abandoned to avoid pacing issues. Sick new jet, same old attitude. My first exposure to Silver Sable was the Spider-Man animated series. No, not that one. But in the comics, she popped up in the 80s as part of Spidey's long black suit arc, bringing her whole organization to New York to track down a jewel thief. Insomniac pulled from that original look for the games, modernizing her to fit in with the aesthetic that they've cultivated. I'm glad the mum haircut stuck around though, that was always my favourite. Quoting from Jacinda Chu in the art book, Silver Sable has a cool personality, so I wanted to give her a haircut that was intimidating. We experimented with a variety of blunt cut hairstyles. Many traditional Marvel heroines wear heels, and though they're not particularly functional, they feel like they're part of her DNA, so I kept them. We did give her wedges, for practicality. Here, Sable has caught wind that Hammerhead's stolen her tech, and worse yet, he's investing heavily in something called Project Olympus. A partnership is formed here, with barriers slowly breaking down between Sable and Spidey, but it thankfully doesn't start that way, so we can get a cheeky little boss fight. You would be forgiven for mistaking Sable's boss for Taskmaster's. I can't shake the feeling that perhaps this was crammed into the DLC at the last minute because so many were vocalizing how disappointed they were that we didn't get to fight her in the base game. If we get too close to Sable during our fight, and she isn't stunned, she'll flip us with ease, meaning we need to, you guessed it, focus on gadgets, webs, and throwing environmentals at her. As a whole package, the DLC gives me exactly what I wanted from the base game. More opportunities to fight alongside some well-known faces. Yuri is unfortunately mechanically absent in her episode, but both Black Cat and Silver Sable get to feel present in the action.
You're alive.
Did you honestly think I was dead?
How did you find me?
Same way she did.
Black Cat comes back from the dead, 8 of her 9 lives still intact, and saves us when Hammerhead goes on a rampage. While we don't get to fight alongside her here, the heist gives us a combat section and a stealth section with Felicia. She chucks down bombs that stun enemies or can be swung around for extra damage, and for stealth, she becomes an extra mechanic, with mixed results. It essentially boils down to pressing the right directional button to ask her to take down some goons, and the issue here is that you can't screw this up and send her in if it puts her in danger. There's no awareness of enemy placement. The option only ever appears if it's safe for her to leap down, killing some of the potential challenge. Sable is much more present in her episode. When we eventually track down Hammerhead's hideout, she does some real damage, actively kicking henchmen ass to the point that if you like, you can just sit back and watch her mop up the arena. Spidey and Sable working together to tackle Hammerhead is endearing, and their relationship is believably developed to the point where the end of the story is reluctant colleagues, if not friends.
There are medical records in here.
Yeah, mostly about that metal plate in his head.
Carbon steel.
Super strong, pretty sensitive to
heat.
Battling Hammerhead at the end of Silver Linings is, mechanically, the best boss fight in the entire game, DLC or otherwise. Whilst Doc Ock is more emotional and fighting Rhino and Scorpion in the shipyard has a lot of flavour to it, none of our previous fights come close to the test and challenge that this closing chapter does. Hammerhead is now a complete monstrosity, removing the human from transhuman. The only piece of his body remaining is his head, and even then, it's got that big metal plate jammed in there. He has a small handful of deadly moves, throwing bombs into the air for area of effect damage, meaning you need to constantly be moving, swinging around the outskirts of Sable's hovercraft. He has a laser which has quick fast activation. There's barely a half second between him leveling it at you and actually firing it for a good chunk of damage. The fight follows 2 waves. At first, it's a simple sparring match. We need to weaken his exoskeleton so we can hold him in place for Sable to burn a hole into his face. Not only can we hurt him without webbing him up, but working together with Sable really feels like Spidey and his gruff pal have come to an understanding at last. For the second wave, Sable drops bombs which we need to pick up and swing at Hammerhead to reduce his shield. While it falls into the camp of throwing an environmental object so we can harm the boss, this one works because it's reacting to Sable's contribution to the combat rather than picking up pieces of rubble. The entirety of Sable's ship is our playground, a nice wide arena that lets us play with all of Spidey's abilities, not just his close quarters combat. It's all about our ability to read the space around us as well as marking how Hammerhead telegraphs his moves. It's spectacular. With the metalhead down, somehow surviving a jet to the face, how's that for non-lethal? We say our goodbyes to Sable. Hammerhead will soon be in the raft, and her country, Symkaria, is still locked in a terminal civil war. While she quips that she learned about the power of jokes from Spider-Man, her whole DLC episode shows that she learned something else. She brought a great power to New York City with her weaponry. While she'd rather be back home helping her people, she had a responsibility to return. And she's not the only one whose responsibilities have broadened.
I think the web shooters are a little tight.
Get used to it.
The city that never sleeps, and by extension the entirety of Spider-Man 1, ends in a way that feels inevitable. Peter and Miles stand on a gargoyle looking over the city. His first training lesson. Pete's been putting it off, but Miles says he's ready, and it's time for us to trust in that. An hour before, Miles asks Peter what exactly Aunt May meant with the phrase, "When you help someone, you help everyone." Standing on that gargoyle, Pete embodies it, carrying her biggest lesson into the future. He is going to help Miles Morales become Spider-Man. And if he does that, Miles will carry those lessons on to help everyone. As grandiose as the gesture is, and as important as this scene later becomes in the context of Insomniac's wider narrative, it feels small and it feels intimate. Peter might wear the mask here, but it's not the spider talking, it's the man. When Otto betrayed the trust of Spider and Man, the two personalities fused into hurt and rage. When May's fate was in the hands of both Spider and Man, the two beings overlapped into a painful choice. But teaching Miles, that's when the fusion of duality evolves into something greater.
Peter Parker had to become Spider-Man and go over there in order to save the world or the city or Mary Jane or somebody. But at the same time, Aunt May needed her medicine or she might die. He questions, why am I doing this? So he was riddled with neuroses and riddled with worries and doubts. I'm rather proud of that. The fact that Peter, like any normal human being, had self-doubts.
The past and the present clash the same way Spider-Man and Peter Parker do. The hero and the man are present in this memory, and it's finally a happy one. Insomniac gave him that, building on the legacy that came before to craft something fresh, something new, and something that felt like a gift. Not just to fans, but Peter as well. A story deserving of the man and the mask.
Wake up, I'm about to shake up every little thing, show you all that we can be. Come dance in my glow. Fireflies in the yard, everything's a work of art. Already got everything we need to dance in the glow. That's how I'm feeling love. Ooh, me and my friends dance until we drop, and the good times don't stop.